Ian Burley, 43, and Helen Nichols, 39, were sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal stabbing of John Gogarty, 65, at his home in Wimwell, Barnsley. During a robbery, the pair stabbed Gogarty 69 times. At the time of the attack, Burley was on licence after serving 18 years of a life sentence for a previous murder. At Sheffield Crown Court, he was given a whole life term, while Nichols received a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years. Both also received concurrent sentences for robbery. Burley was sentenced to 16 years and Nichols to 12 years. The attack was discovered by Gogarty's son 4 days later, on the 17th of July. Police described the crime as horrendous and atrocious, highlighting the extreme violence involved. Both Burley and Nichols had initially denied murder during their trial, although Nichols admitted to the robbery. John Wass from Derbyshire was sentenced to a whole life tariff at Derby Crown Court in August 2017 after being convicted of 17 counts of historical child sexual abuse. His crimes, which included gape, sexual assault, and sexual exposure, stretched back decades to the 1960s and involved 3 different victims. After a 3-week trial, the jury found him guilty of sustained abuse that destroyed the lives of those he targeted. What made Wass's case unprecedented is that he became the only serving prisoner in the UK with a whole life order who has never been convicted of murder. His crimes were deemed so serious, persistent, and damaging that the court ruled he should never be released. Detective Constable Paul Butler of Chesterfield's Public Protection Unit, who led the 2.5-year investigation, said the sentence reflected the severity of Wass's offences. He added that he hoped the outcome would encourage other survivors of child abuse to come forward, knowing that the justice system can and will impose the harshest penalties on perpetrators of such crimes. Paul Glenn, 33, from Fleetwood, Lancashire, was convicted of murder for fatally stabbing Robert Bogle, 25, in Farset, Cambridgeshire. The killing was a case of mistaken identity. Glenn had been hired as a contract killer to target a wealthy builder's son, Victor Smart, but instead attacked Bogle, who was living in the same house. Glenn was also found guilty of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm, while other men implicated in the plot were cleared of murder but faced separate charges for their involvement. The court heard that the murder plot had been orchestrated by Robert Lotz, a wealthy builder who wanted Smart eliminated because he believed Smart was intimidating his son. Lotz allegedly contacted Glenn through intermediaries, including Wayne Wright and Victor Dark. Glenn, described by the prosecution as a professional killer with a prior murder conviction, travelled from Liverpool to Smart's home armed with a knife. Tragically, he attacked the wrong man, killing Bogle instead. During sentencing at Norwich Crown Court, Deputy High Court Judge Sir John Blofeld condemned Glenn's actions, highlighting the terrible loss of a young life. Glenn was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge ordering that he remain in prison for the rest of his natural life. For his conviction of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm, he received a concurrent 9-year term. The case serves as a stark example of the deadly consequences of a contract killing gone wrong. David Tiley, born 1960, is a British murderer convicted of killing his disabled fiancée Susan Hale and her carer, Sarah Merritt, in Southampton in March 2007. Susan Hale, 49, suffered from cerebellar ataxia, a rare degenerative brain disorder that affected her mobility. Sarah Merritt, 39, was her carer. Tiley had a prior criminal record, including a 6-year prison sentence for gape in 1995, and had returned to prison multiple times for failing to comply with sex offender registration requirements. Tiley killed Susan Hale between the 5th and 16th of March 2007. He stabbed her 4 times following an argument, during which she reportedly taunted him about his past. Tiley lived with her body in the flat they shared for more than a week. On 15th March, Sarah Merritt visited Hale's flat for her regular duties. Tiley tied her up, stole her cash card to withdraw £150, gaped her, and stabbed her twice, killing her. Tiley was arrested in Swanage on the 17th of March 2007, 2 days after Merritt's body was discovered. The brutality of the crimes shocked the local community. Tylee admitted both murders at Winchester Crown Court on the 14th of June 2007. Mr. Justice Irwin described the crimes as defying adequate description and imposed a whole life order, meaning Tylee will never be released from prison. The case highlighted failures in monitoring high-risk sex offenders. At the time, the European Court of Human Rights was reviewing the legality of whole life sentences in the UK, potentially impacting Tylee and similar cases. Victims' families described the murders as horrific and shocking to the core, emphasizing the profound trauma caused by his actions. Dale Kregan is a British murderer responsible for the deaths of two Greater Manchester police officers, Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone, as well as two gangland murders in 2012. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he will never be released. On the 18th of September 2012, officers Hughes and Bone were responding to a reported burglary in Hattersley, Tameside, when they were ambushed by Kregan. The attack involved 32 shots fired from a Glock pistol and an M75 hand grenade. Fiona Bone died at the scene, while Nicola Hughes succumbed to her injuries in hospital. This marked the first instance in England where two female police officers were killed on duty. Kregan had a long history of criminal activity, including drug dealing and weapons offences. He lost his left eye under unclear circumstances, earning him the nickname One Eye. By his early 20s, he was dealing cocaine and collecting firearms, including machine guns. Earlier in 2012, Kregan was involved in the murders of Mark Short and his father David Short, carried out in a gang feud between the Short and Atkinson families. Both attacks involved firearms, and David Short's murder also involved a hand grenade, the first recorded use of grenades in UK killings. Kregan walked into a police station in Hyde shortly after the killings and was arrested. Initially pleading not guilty, he later admitted to all four murders in 2013. His trial took place at Preston Crown Court, and on 13th June 2013, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order for the four murders. Following his conviction, Kregan spent time on a hunger strike at HM Prison Full Sutton and was moved to Ashworth Hospital in 2013. He was later transferred back to Manchester in 2018. Authorities recovered one of the Glock pistols used in the Short murders in April 2024 during a raid on a gang safe house. In 1989, at the age of 19, Desmond Lee killed his landlady, Shirley Carr, by strangling her with his bare hands. He later claimed that the attack was provoked after she taunted him about the breakup of his first gay relationship and blamed his alcoholism. Lee pleaded not guilty to murder, but was convicted and served 14 years of a life sentence. He was released on life license in 2004. On 15th August 2009, Lee killed his lover, Christopher Pratt, a married father of two, at the flat in Sackville Street, Ravensthorpe, near Dewsbury. Lee fatally broke Pratt's voice box and a bone in his neck. After the murder, he remained in the flat, using Pratt's credit and debit cards to pay bills, buy alcohol for a party, and order more than £200 in food from Asda, as well as attempting to purchase £1,181 of goods from Argos. The next day, he moved Pratt's naked body into the back of his car and transported it to moorland off New Hay Road in Scamondon, where it was dumped. The body was discovered by a jogger on the 26th of August, 11 days after the murder. Lee was charged with murder on the 13th of October 2009 and remanded in custody. At Leeds Crown Court on the 13th of April 2010, he admitted to killing Pratt, but claimed it had been a freak sex accident. After retiring to consider their verdict, the jury found Lee guilty of murder on the 24th of April 2010, taking just an hour and 45 minutes to reach their decision. Judge Mrs. Justice Nicola Davies condemned Lee as a dangerous and evil man, noting that this murder occurred less than 5 years after his release from prison. She imposed a whole life order, stating that in Lee's case, life should mean life. Billy White and Gary Lindley were sentenced to life imprisonment for the premeditated killing of fellow inmate Brett Rogers at HMP Long Lartin. The pair, who claimed they had been ordered by God to carry out the attack, said they believed murdering Rogers would cleanse him of his crimes and exorcise a demon. White, who was already serving a life sentence for murdering his partner, was handed a whole life term for his part in the crime. Lindley received a minimum sentence of 17.5 years, having already been in prison for his role in a violent burglary. The court heard that the two men plotted Rogers' murder for about a week before suffocating him with a pillow and attempting to break his neck, leaving religious symbols drawn on his body afterward. Judge Robert Juckes, QC, described the act as determined and premeditated and said White's whole life order was justified given his previous murder conviction. Rogers was serving a life sentence with a minimum of 32 years for the brutal killings of his mother and her friend, crimes he committed in 2015 in a frenzy of violence. His death marked the fourth homicide at the high-security prison in just 5 years. White and Lindley's explanation for their actions, presented as religious justification, was dismissed by the court, with both men showing a chilling lack of remorse. Their attack, carried out while working as prison cleaners, added another layer of brutality to a case already marked by shocking violence. Gary Vinter, a notorious and violently unpredictable criminal from Middlesbrough, first entered the public eye in the 1990s. Standing 6 feet 7 inches tall, Vinter was involved in the murder of his colleague Carl Eden on August 2, 1995. Eden, a 22-year-old man with a fiancée and an expected child, was stabbed to death by Vinter at the train tracks where they both worked. Vinter turned himself in for the crime and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years in 1996. Despite this, he was released in 2005. After his release, Vinter married Anne White, a mother of 4, in July 2006, despite opposition from her family. Their relationship quickly deteriorated due to his abusive behavior, resulting in a separation in 2007. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2006, Vinter was involved in a violent pub brawl, leading to a 6-month prison sentence. Released in December 2007, Vinter resumed his violent tendencies just 8 weeks later. On February 11th, 2008, he kidnapped Anne White, taking her to his mother's home, where he stabbed her to death. During his trial at Teesside Crown Court, Vinter admitted to the murder and taunted White's family, showing no remorse. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Vinter's violence continued even within prison. In July 2011, while at Wakefield Prison, he attacked fellow inmate Roy Whiting, a convicted sex offender, stabbing him in the eye with a sharpened plastic toilet brush. Vinter pled guilty to wounding with intent and received another life sentence with a minimum term of 5 years. His aggression persisted, and in November 2014, he attacked Lee Newell in the segregation unit at Woodhill Prison, causing head and brain injuries, as well as permanent blindness in Newell's right eye. Initially pleading not guilty to attempted murder, Vinter later admitted guilt during the trial in February 2016. He received an additional 18-year sentence. Jason Gomez and Paul Wodkin were sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal murder of fellow inmate Darren Flynn at HMP Swaleside on the 25th of March. The attack involved luring Flynn into a cell and stabbing him 190 times with improvised weapons, including a blade wrapped in material and a black-handled implement with a thin, protruding shaft. The pair believed Flynn was an informant, or grass, although Kent police confirmed there was no evidence to support this claim. Gomez admitted his involvement, while Wodkin pleaded not guilty at Maidstone Crown Court, despite both men confessing to prison officers immediately after the attack. Gomez received a whole life tariff, while Wodkin was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 30 years. Detective Sergeant Fiona Matherley from Kent Police described the murder as almost indescribable in its brutality. She emphasized that the attack was carefully planned, carried out with the sole purpose of killing Flynn, and motivated by mistaken beliefs. Neither Gomez nor Wodkin showed any remorse, and both reportedly smiled and laughed in court as the judge passed sentence. Mark Bridger is the convicted killer of April Jones, a 5-year-old girl whose disappearance on the 1st of October 2012 sparked the largest missing person search in UK history. Bridger was arrested less than 24 hours after April went missing and subsequently charged with her abduction, murder, and perverting the course of justice. On the evening of the 1st of October 2012, April was last seen playing outside near her home. When her mother could not find her, she called 999, prompting police to launch a massive search involving specialized teams and hundreds of volunteers. Despite extensive efforts, April's body was never fully recovered, although forensic evidence later confirmed her death. Mark Leonard Bridger, then 46, became a suspect due to matching the description of a man seen with April entering a grey Land Rover Discovery. On the 6th of October 2012, he was formally charged with murder, abduction, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Evidence against him included human bone fragments and blood in his cottage that matched April's DNA. Bridger initially claimed he accidentally ran over April and could not remember disposing of her body due to being intoxicated and panicked. Bridger's trial began on the 29th of April 2013 at Mould Crown Court. On the 30th of May 2013, he was found guilty of abduction, murder, and perverting the course of justice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he will never be released. The judge described him as a pathological and glib liar and a peephole. Bridger later claimed to a prison chaplain that he had disposed of April's body in the nearby Afon Doulas, but police believe her remains were scattered around the local countryside. Anoir Rossa, a 33-year-old former soldier, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release for the brutal murder of 4-year-old Riley Turner. The boy was killed while asleep at his family home in Cayley, West Yorkshire, on the 20th of January 2013. Rossa had been staying with Riley's family at their Harewood Road home in Brackenbank at the time of the attack. The court described the killing as savage and sadistic, though the motive may never be fully understood. Rossa was characterized during sentencing as a psychotic, bullying alcoholic. During the hearing at Bradford Crown Court, family members reacted with loud outbursts as the judge, Mr. Justice Coulson, sentenced Rossa to life imprisonment, stating simply, "You must go to prison for life." Riley's family released a statement expressing the depth of their grief. While justice has now been done, no sentence will ever be enough for what we are going through and what that man has done to our family. It will not bring our little man back. Detective Superintendent Mark Ridley of West Yorkshire Police called the case incredibly horrifying and tragic, noting the profound impact it had on everyone involved in the investigation. He emphasized that Rossa had abused the trust and kindness of Riley's family, who had taken him into their home, and had shown no remorse or compassion for the pain he caused. David Fuller from Kent is an English convicted murderer and necrophile. He was sentenced to a whole life term for the brutal murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pearce in Royal Tunbridge Wells, Kent, in 1987. Fuller broke into the victims' homes months apart, strangled them, and sexually assaulted them. His crimes remained unsolved for decades until a cold case review in 2007 preserved DNA evidence, which ultimately identified Fuller as the perpetrator in 2020. In addition to the bedsit murders, Fuller was convicted of 12 years for mortuary offences committed while working as an electrician at the Kent and Sussex Hospital in Tunbridge Wells and its successor, the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury. Over more than a decade, he recorded himself abusing more than 100 female corpses. He later admitted to 16 additional offences at the mortuaries between 2007 and 2020. He is currently imprisoned at HMP Frankland. Prior to his convictions, Fuller had a relatively ordinary personal life. He was married 3 times and worked as an electrician, having completed a 4-year apprenticeship with the Ministry of Defence. He had interests in birdwatching, cycling, live music, and photography. And in 1985, he accompanied the rock band Cutting Crew on tour as an unofficial photographer. Fuller's crimes shocked the nation, exposing significant failures in hospital oversight and prompting widespread debate about the safety and monitoring of mortuary staff. John Taylor, a convicted murderer, already serving time for the killing of 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan in 2000, has been given a whole life sentence after admitting to a string of vile and sadistic sex attacks committed over nearly 20 years. Leeds Crown Court heard that between 1977 and 1996, Taylor targeted women and children in a series of brutal assaults, including tying a 7-year-old girl to a church drainpipe before indecently assaulting her and threatening a mother with a knife while forcing her to commit a degrading act in front of her 3 children. Judge Mayers condemned Taylor's actions as a 20-year campaign of gape and sexual assaults, driven by a sadistic need to cause pain and fear. Taylor's latest convictions came to light after a cold case review, and DNA breakthroughs linked him to the historic offenses. His crimes add to an already horrific record. In 2002, he was jailed for the murder of Leanne Tiernan, and later received 2 further life sentences for gapes he committed in the 1980s. With this new whole-life order, he will never be released from prison. Police praised the courage of survivors who stepped forward after decades, saying their testimony was crucial to holding Taylor accountable. For the victims, the ruling brought a measure of justice, though one admitted feeling haunted by the thought that if Taylor's past crimes had been dealt with sooner, Leanne's murder might never have happened. Mark Chivers, a convicted killer, murdered his ex-girlfriend Maria Stubbings at her home in Chelmsford, Essex, in 2008. Stubbings, aged 50, had begun a relationship with Chivers, unaware that he had previously killed a partner in Germany. Chivers was later jailed in 2009 for her murder and received a whole life sentence. The inquest into Stubbings' death revealed a series of failures by Essex police that contributed to her death. In July 2008, Maria Stubbings first contacted police after being assaulted by Chivers. Despite being considered high risk and initially provided with a panic alarm, the alarm was removed the day after Chivers' arrest. Later that year, Chivers was found guilty of assault, but was freed after serving 3 months in jail, and Stubbings was never informed of his release. In December 2008, despite multiple 999 calls from Stubbings, police failed to visit her house for a week. When officers finally arrived, it was Chivers who answered the door, claiming Stubbings was away, and the officers left without checking further. Her body was discovered the next day, likely having been there for several days, and she had been strangled with a dog lead. Following the inquest, Stubbings' daughter, Celia Peachy, expressed gratitude that the jury highlighted the whole catalogue of police failures that contributed to her mother's death. Essex Police Chief Constable Stephen Kavanagh acknowledged the force's shortcomings in protecting Stubbings and her 15-year-old son, Bengai, and emphasised that lessons had been learned. Over £8.5 million was invested in better intelligence, risk assessment, and partnership working to prevent such failures in the future. John McGrady, a 48-year-old career sex offender, was sentenced to a full life term for the brutal murder and dismemberment of 15-year-old Rochelle Holness in South London. The attack occurred in September when Rochelle was using a call box to contact her boyfriend. McGrady, a former butcher, abducted her, strangled her, and then dismembered her body with a hacksaw. He placed the remains into 5 bin bags and left them near a rubbish chute at Milford Towers in Catford, where he lived. McGrady had a long history of sexual violence spanning more than 2 decades. His prior convictions included the gape of 2 young women in 1988 and the attempted abduction of a woman at knife point in 1993. He had also been acquitted of gape 3 times in 1984, claiming the women had consented. Despite this record, he had not been under close supervision following his last release in 1997. Investigators warned that it was likely McGrady had attacked other women during the years between his release and Rochelle's murder, urging any victims to come forward. McGrady was eventually caught after attempting to take his own life and leaving a note to his girlfriend in which he confessed to the crime. At the Old Bailey, Judge Stephen Kramer described McGrady as a dangerous predator motivated by sexual desire and sentenced him to life imprisonment, ensuring he would never be released. Rochelle's parents, Jennifer Bennett and Denroy Holness, publicly criticized the justice system for allowing such a dangerous man to live in the community, calling for reforms that would alert the public to the presence of high-risk sex offenders. Detective Inspector Tim Grattan-Kane described McGrady as evil and stressed the importance of measures to protect communities from offenders like him. John Sweeney, 54, is a convicted murderer responsible for the deaths of two of his former girlfriends, Paula Fields and Melissa Halstead, whose bodies were found in canals in London and the Netherlands. Sweeney, originally from Liverpool, had a history of extreme violence and was already serving life imprisonment for a previous attack when he was linked to these murders. Halstead, 33, was found in a Rotterdam canal in 1990, while Fields, 31, was discovered in Regent's Canal in London in 2001. Investigators believe Sweeney may have been involved in the disappearance of at least 3 other women in the UK, potentially former girlfriends, whose identities remain unknown. Sweeney's violent history included a 1994 axe attack on another former girlfriend, Delia Balmer, which left him with 4 life sentences. Following this attack, he went on the run and killed Fields. During his crimes, he deliberately dismembered both Halstead and Fields, removing their heads and hands to hinder identification. Many of the victims' body parts have never been recovered. In his homes and prison cell, authorities discovered hundreds of drawings, artworks, and poems, some depicting his victims, including macabre references to Halstead, such as a drawing of a gravestone reading R.I.P. Melissa Halstead, and notes describing her body being chopped up and fed to fish. Sweeney was described in court as a controlling and possessive man who displayed no remorse for his actions. The investigation into his crimes remains ongoing, with authorities seeking to identify other potential victims in the UK, Netherlands, and Europe. His attacks combined obsessive control, brutal violence, and attempts to erase evidence, marking him as a calculated and highly dangerous offender. Malcolm Green, a convicted double killer, was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1991 for the murder later dubbed the Body in the Bags case. He was found guilty of killing Clive Tully, a man from New Zealand, whose dismembered torso, head, and limbs were discovered in separate bags. Tully's identity was confirmed with the help of a computer-enhanced image created by a newspaper graphic artist. The investigation began after a torso was found in Rogerstone, followed days later by Tully's head and limbs in the marshes of St Bride's Wentluge, located between Cardiff and Newport. When Green was apprehended, it was revealed that he had recently been released from a previous life sentence for the murder of a Cardiff prostitute 2 decades earlier, a crime that also involved dismemberment. Green was sentenced to life imprisonment once again, with a recommendation to serve at least 25 years, but the Home Secretary imposed a whole life tariff, ensuring he would remain in prison for life. Rahana Ashad, a 36-year-old taxi driver, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order after murdering his wife and 3 children in Cheadle Hulme, Greater Manchester. His victims were his wife, Uzma Ashad, 32, and their children, Adam, 11, Abbas, 8, and Henna, 6. The killings were triggered by Ashad's discovery that his wife had been having a 3-year affair with family friend Nasir Iqbal, a married father of 4. Ashad had separated from his wife in 2004, but returned to live with her the previous year. Uzma had reportedly confided in her brother that she feared for her life, saying, "Count the days until he kills me." On the 28th of July, during a day trip to Blackpool, Ashad's anger escalated. Back at their home, he beat Uzma with a rounder's bat before taking the children downstairs and fatally striking them one by one. The brutality of the killings shocked investigators. After the murders, Ashad fled to Thailand, but was traced and extradited back to the UK to face trial. At Manchester Crown Court, Ashad claimed that his wife had killed the children and that he had only attacked her in a rage after discovering her affair. The jury rejected this defense in under 2 hours. Mr. Justice David Clarke sentenced him, emphasizing, "Life imprisonment in your case means life. You killed your entire family in circumstances of great brutality." Mark Fellows, known by the nickname the Iceman, was handed a whole life sentence after being convicted of the murders of rival underworld figures Paul Massey and John Kinsella. Originally from Salford but living in Warrington at the time of the killings, Fellows established himself as a cold and methodical hitman, carrying out assassinations linked to criminal feuds involving the anti-A-Team network. In July 2015, he ambushed Massey outside his home in Clifton, gunning him down with a weapon resembling a submachine gun while dressed in military-style clothing. Nearly 3 years later, in May 2018, he executed John Kinsella near Rainhill as Kinsella walked with his pregnant partner, using encrypted EncroChat devices to coordinate the murder with accomplice Stephen Boyle, who acted as a spotter. The case against Fellows relied on painstaking evidence, including GPS data from a Garmin fitness watch found in his home that placed him scouting near Massey's property before the killing. Following an 8-week trial under heavy security, Mr. Justice William Davis sentenced Fellows to a whole life order, condemning him as a ruthless contract killer with no prospect of release. Boyle, meanwhile, was convicted for his role in Kinsella's murder, but acquitted of involvement in Massey's death. Since his imprisonment, Fellows has faced violent retaliation, most notably in 2019, when he was slashed by another inmate inside HMP Whitemore, sustaining serious injuries. He later attempted to appeal his sentence as excessive, but the Court of Appeal rejected his claim, ensuring that Fellows will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Anthony Heirs, 49, was sentenced to a whole life prison term for the murder of his lover Kelly Pearce, 36, at a flat in Canvey Island, Essex. Heirs attacked Pearce with a claw hammer before stabbing her more than 40 times, causing fatal injuries. Pearce bled to death in front of police and paramedics after Heirs fled the scene. He was later arrested after being caught on CCTV and linked to the crime via DNA evidence. This is Heirs' second murder conviction. In 1994, he was jailed for life at the Old Bailey for strangling his former partner Dawn Wisdom after she had aborted their unborn child. He was released on license in March 2012. The court heard that Heirs had a long history of violence against women, including attacks in 1988 and 1989, which raised concerns about his early release. During sentencing, Judge Maura McGowan described the attack on Pearce as extraordinary brutality, amounting to sadism, noting that Heirs had now been convicted of murdering a woman for the second time. The victim's family described Kelly as a loving mother and daughter with a big heart, while Essex police stated that Heirs was a dangerous individual responsible for horrific injuries. Andrew Dawson, born in 1962, is a British serial killer responsible for 3 murders spanning nearly 3 decades. He is serving a whole life order for his latter 2 murders, meaning he will never be released from prison. Dawson's first known murder occurred in August 1981 in Ormskirk. His victim, 91-year-old shopkeeper Henry Walsh, was stabbed 11 times. Dawson was convicted of Walsh's murder in 1982 and subsequently imprisoned. He was released on license in 1999, but was returned to prison on 3 separate occasions between 2003 and 2007, before being released again in 2008. Nearly 3 decades later, Dawson committed 2 further murders in Chaddesden, Derby. On the 25th of July 2010, John David Matthews was found stabbed to death in his flat. 5 days later, Paul Hancock was similarly murdered in the same area. In both cases, Dawson placed the victims' bodies in bathtubs, apparently to remove odors, highlighting a methodical approach to concealment. Dawson was arrested on the same day Matthews' body was discovered, in Whitehaven. On the 18th of July 2011, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order for these 2 murders, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Andrew Dawson's crimes have been featured in multiple documentaries, illustrating the gravity and notoriety of his actions. These include a 2012 episode of When Life Means Life and a 2020 episode of Britain's Most Evil Killers. Dawson's criminal trajectory, from his first murder in 1981 to his final killings in 2010, demonstrates a persistent and lethal pattern of violence, culminating in a sentence that guarantees he will never re-enter society. 17-year-old Mark Robinson had recently joined the RAF when on the 27th of May 1979, he was home on leave for the bank holiday. During this time, he murdered his 32-year-old neighbour, Patricia Wagner. Robinson strangled her at her home in Low Grange, Billingham, leaving her body on the living room floor. Wagner's 8-year-old son discovered her body shortly afterward. Witnesses reported seeing Robinson walking toward her house in the rain less than 2 hours after she was last seen alive, and he was arrested within hours. Robinson later admitted to police that he had gone to Wagner's house seeking sex, believing she would not refuse him. He gained entry by claiming he was drunk and had confused the address. According to Robinson, Wagner threatened to tell his mother about the encounter. Robinson claimed he lost his temper after she insulted him, hitting her in the face. Wagner attempted to defend herself, but Robinson punched and kicked her, then used a lamp cord to strangle her. The post-mortem confirmed that Wagner died from asphyxiation and also suffered facial injuries, including a broken nose. Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder. After serving 10 years, Robinson was released in March 1989. He later met Sharon Morley in Wakefield, and they moved to Billingham, though their relationship was marked by frequent arguments, largely because Morley wanted to return to Wakefield. On the 19th of September 1989, just 7 months after his release, Robinson discovered a photograph of her former boyfriend. During a heated argument, he attacked Morley, beating and stabbing her to death. At Newcastle Crown Court, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life tariff. In 2011, weighing 20 stone and standing 6 feet tall, Robinson assaulted several prison officers after his bread ration was altered. The attack required 10 staff to subdue him, resulted in 5 officers being hospitalized, and earned him an additional 3 years on his sentence. Ali Harbi Ali, an ISIS-inspired extremist, was sentenced to a whole life term for the murder of Sir David Ames, the Conservative MP for Southend West. On the 15th of October, Ali gained entry to Sir David's constituency surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea by pretending to be an NHS worker. Once inside, Ali stabbed the MP more than 20 times. Sir David had devoted 38 years to public service and was engaged in helping constituents when he was attacked. The murder shocked the nation and was described by Judge Mr. Justice Sweeney as a crime that struck at the heart of our democracy. Ali, from Kentish Town in North London, told the court that he had considered targeting other MPs, including Michael Gove, as part of a plan motivated by revenge for MPS votes on airstrikes in Syria. During the trial, Ali showed no remorse, stating that he had no regrets or shame for his actions and had intended to die as a martyr, anticipating that police would shoot him. He instructed his barrister not to present anything in mitigation, and he displayed little emotion as the judge delivered the sentence, which ensures he will never be released from prison. The court heard impact statements from members of Parliament and staff affected by the attack. Some MPs described heightened personal security measures, including wearing stab vests and installing panic alarms during constituency surgeries. Julie Cushion, a long-time aide present during the attack, recounted the traumatic experience of trying to help while witnessing Ali's smug, self-satisfied demeanor. She described being haunted by the fear of a similar attack. The jury convicted Ali of both murder and preparing acts of terrorism after just 18 minutes of deliberation. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crime, noting that Sir David had done nothing to justify the attack and describing his death as a loss of national significance. The whole life sentence ensures that Ali will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Ryan Matthews was being sentenced to a whole life term for the murder of healthcare worker Sharon Wall at Watton Lawn Hospital in Gloucester. Matthews was already serving a life sentence for a previous double murder. On 9th July, Ms. Wall, 53, was stabbed twice in the back at the hospital's Montpellier low-secure unit where Matthews was living. Despite efforts from staff, she could not be saved. Matthews pleaded guilty to her murder in December. Investigations by both police and the NHS have not determined how Matthews obtained the knife, though officials confirmed it was not one of the controlled sharps kept on the ward. Matthews, who has previously changed his name, was convicted in 1983 under the name Stephen Cecil King for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to murder. His mental health had been monitored over multiple hospital placements since leaving Broadmoor High Security Hospital in 1999 under the Mental Health Act. At the time of the killing, Matthews suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder, which had been managed with medication. He had arrived at Watton Lawn in 2012 and was due to be transferred to Ty Catrin Hospital in Cardiff on the day of the attack. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Porter described the case as dreadful, highlighting that Ms. Wall was a dedicated and hard-working healthcare worker assistant whose family has been left devastated. Sean Clee, Chief Executive of the Gloucestershire Together NHS Foundation Trust, confirmed that Matthew's prior convictions were known to staff and that they had been satisfied with his placement at the time. The Trust is reviewing and strengthening search procedures at the unit. Michael Smith, born around 1954, is a British convicted murderer who received a whole-life sentence after killing Peter Summers in 2006, less than a year after being released from a 30-year prison term for a previous murder. Smith had originally been jailed for the 1975 murder of his then-girlfriend, 18-year-old Sheila Deakin, whom he strangled following an argument over another man. He served 30 years before being released on 26 August 2005. On or around 17 August 2006, Smith attacked 35-year-old Peter Summers in his flat in Stoke-on-Trent using a champagne bottle. Summers sustained massive head injuries and was left to die, possibly surviving for several days before succumbing to his injuries. Smith's motive was theft. He intended to steal £8,000 that Summers had stored at home, and he used some of the stolen money on a shopping spree with his girlfriend, Caroline Hume, in Stafford. Smith gave himself up to police on the 25th of August 2006, not to confess but because he was being recalled to prison. He admitted to the murder, and at Stafford Crown Court, Mr. Justice Nelson described the attack as brutal, noting the shocking fact that it was Smith's second murder. He was sentenced to a whole-life tariff, meaning he will never be released from prison, and is listed by the Home Office as one of the prisoners who will die in custody. Smith's case highlights the dangers posed by violent offenders re-entering society and raises serious questions about parole and the monitoring of released murderers. Derice Roche was sentenced to a whole-life prison term for the murder of his great-uncle, 64-year-old Fintan McDwyer, in Fallowfield, South Manchester, on the 30th of June 2024. Roche attacked McDwyer after climbing through his bedroom window in what he later claimed was a bungled attempt to steal the victim's dog, a Staffordshire Bull Terrier cross. McDwyer, who was home alone at the time, was stabbed 77 times. His body was discovered the following day by his son. Roche had been released on licence only months earlier, having served 12 years for the murder of Adam Steele in 2011, when Roche was 16. Steele had been stabbed by Roche during a dispute at a New Year's Eve party in Salford. Roche received a life sentence with a minimum term of 12 years, while his older brother Owen was convicted of manslaughter. During the investigation into McDwyer's death, Greater Manchester Police recovered audio of the struggle captured on a CCTV camera McDwyer had installed to monitor his dog. Additional CCTV outside the property showed a masked man climbing fences to flee, and forensic evidence, including blood traces and DNA from a small torch, linked Roche to the crime. When arrested, Roche admitted killing McDwyer, but claimed he acted in self-defense and had only intended to steal the dog. At Manchester Crown Court, Roche was convicted of murder in May 2025 and received a whole-life sentence, meaning he will never be released. Detective Inspector Lee Shaw described the attack as nothing short of horrific, praising the family's resilience during the trial. McDwyer's family paid tribute to him as a true gentleman and lamented that he was denied years with his sons and grandchildren. Roche's sentencing marks the second life sentence for a murder committed shortly after release, highlighting the tragic consequences of his repeated violent behaviour. Steven Wright is an English serial killer known as the Suffolk Strangler. He is serving life imprisonment for the murder of 5 women in Ipswich, Suffolk, during the final months of 2006, for which he was given a whole-life order. Wright was the second of 4 children born to military policeman Conrad Wright and veterinary nurse Patricia. His early life involved frequent relocations due to his father's military service, including periods in Malta and Singapore. His mother left the family when he was 6, and his parents divorced in 1978. Wright left school at 16 without qualifications and subsequently joined the Merchant Navy, working as a chef on ferries from Felixstowe, Suffolk. Wright married twice, first to Angela O'Donovan, with whom he had a son, Michael, and later to Diane Cassell, though both marriages ended in divorce. Over the years, Wright held various jobs, including steward on the ocean liner Queen Elizabeth II, lorry driver, barman, pub landlord, and forklift truck driver. He accrued large gambling debts and declared bankruptcy in the late 1990s. Wright also attempted to take his own life twice, once in 1994 and again in 2000. Prior to the murders, his only criminal conviction was for theft in 2001. He had a history of soliciting prostitutes, which became a significant factor in his later crimes. Between October and December 2006, Wright murdered 5 women in Ipswich, most of whom were sex workers. Forensic evidence, including traces of blood in his car, led to his arrest on the 19th of December 2006. He was convicted of all 5 murders on the 21st of February 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. Wright initially appealed his convictions, but later withdrew his appeal. He has since been charged with the 1999 murder of 17-year-old Victoria Hall and the attempted kidnapping of another woman, with his trial set for February 2026. Victor Miller, born in 1956, is a British criminal serving a life sentence for the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of 14-year-old Stuart Gough in Hagley, Worcestershire, in 1988. A computer operator by profession, Miller targeted newspaper boys, considering them vulnerable. Police suspect he may have been responsible for up to 28 other sexual assaults. In February 1988, Miller abducted Stuart Gough while the boy was on his paper round. Stuart, who suffered from asthma, was sexually assaulted before Miller beat him repeatedly with a rock and concealed his body in a remote woodland area. Despite extensive search efforts involving over 170 officers, police helicopters, search dogs, mounted units, and underwater search teams, Stuart's body remained undiscovered for 2 weeks. Miller was arrested for an unrelated assault during this period. Following his arrest, he confessed to Stuart's murder and guided investigators to the boy's body, which had been hidden under a pile of leaves. During preliminary proceedings, Miller expressed remorse in a letter to Hereford Magistrates' Court, asking for justice to be served and for the maximum sentence to be imposed. At trial, he remained largely silent as charges were read. Miller was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation to serve 30 years. Following this, the Home Secretary issued him a whole life tariff, placing him among a select group of criminals designated to spend the remainder of their lives in prison. After the European Court of Human Rights ruled against politically set tariffs, Miller's sentence was recalculated at 30 years. Under current provisions, his case is reviewed after 25 years and every 5 years thereafter, with the earliest possible release initially set for 2013. However, Miller himself has requested that he never be considered for release, and his trial judge expressed uncertainty about whether it would ever be safe to allow him out. Steven Sansom was sentenced to a whole life order for the murder of Sarah Mayhew, whose dismembered body he and his partner, Gemma Watts, disposed of across multiple locations in London. Sansom, who was out on life license following a 1998 murder of a taxi driver, and Watts both admitted to murder and perverting the course of justice. Watts was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Mrs. Justice Cutts described Miss Mayhew's greatest misfortune was to know the two of you, and emphasized that Sansom had shown no remorse for his actions. The court heard that Ms. Mayhew, who had 2 children aged 12 and 15, met Sansom through a dating website. Messages exchanged between Sansom and Watts revealed plans for depraved and violent sexual activity that escalated into murder. On 8 March 2024, Ms. Mayhew was lured to Sansom's flat in Sutton, where she was subjected to sadomasochistic violence and killed. Her head and limbs were later discovered in Rowdown Field in New Addington, nearly 8 miles from the flat, and her torso was found in the River Wandle. Prosecutor Tom Little KC described the killing as involving sexual and sadistic conduct. Evidence indicated that Sansom and Watts' relationship, which had begun 7 months earlier, was marked by intense sadomasochistic violence, and they had discussed dying together if caught. Sansom reportedly claimed, "We're not evil. We're not evil. We done the world a service." Ms. Mayhew's parents, David and Angela, read statements describing the profound impact of her death, recalling her as a beautiful, pretty girl with a wide circle of friends. The court heard that Watts had been obsessed with Sansom, though the judge clarified that she was not merely acting under his influence. Both defendants received concurrent sentences of 5 years for perverting the course of justice. Sansom's prior conviction and release on license, along with the brutal nature of this murder, contributed to the imposition of a whole life order. Wayne Cosins, a former Metropolitan Police officer, was sentenced to a whole life term for the kidnap, gape and murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everard in March 2021. On 3rd March, Cosins stopped Everard while she walked home in South London, falsely identifying himself as a police officer and handcuffing her. He drove her to Kent, where he gaped and strangled her, later attempting to destroy evidence by burning her body in a refrigerator and disposing of her remains in a pond. Everard's death sparked nationwide shock and widespread debate about women's safety and police accountability. Cosins, born in Dover in 1972, had a history of troubling behavior, including prior allegations of indecent exposure that were inadequately investigated. Despite this, he served in Kent Police, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and ultimately the Metropolitan Police, joining the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch in 2020, without undergoing proper vetting or completing the mandatory probation period. His exploitation of police authority to commit his crimes was a key factor in the severity of his sentencing. He was arrested on the 9th of March 2021 and charged with kidnapping and murder. Cosins pleaded guilty to the kidnap and gape on 8th June and to murder on 9th July 2021. On 30th September, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he will never be released. Cosins is currently held at HM Prison Frankland. The case prompted a public inquiry, chaired by Lady Elish Angelini KC, which found systemic failures in vetting and monitoring, noting that Cosins had a history of sexual offending and should never have been allowed to serve as a police officer. The inquiry made 16 recommendations aimed at preventing abuse of police power in the future. David Mitchell admitted to murdering Robert Hind, a fellow sex offender in West Yorkshire, less than 18 months after his release from a life sentence. Hind, who had previously been identified by police as a risk to the public, went missing from Dewsbury in December 2013 while on license. CCTV footage last captured him at Huddersfield bus station in the company of Mitchell. Hind's body was later discovered in the River Colne in Milnesbridge, Huddersfield. A post-mortem revealed he died from head injuries and strangulation. Mitchell was originally jailed for life in 1991 for murdering his estranged partner. In July 2012, he briefly absconded from HMP Kirkham in Lancashire, but was recaptured 3 days later. Following Mitchell's guilty plea, the probation service emphasized that while they strive to manage the risk posed by released offenders, it is impossible to eliminate it entirely. They also noted that a thorough review had been carried out to learn lessons from the case. Alan Maidment, a convicted killer from Salford, was handed a whole life sentence after brutally murdering Thomas Jones in what police described as a monstrous attack. Just 9 months after being released on license for a previous killing, Maidment armed himself with a knife and launched a frenzied assault on Jones, stabbing him 32 times at his flat in Swinton. The attack was sparked after Maidment's ex-girlfriend told him that Jones had assaulted her. In a chilling effort to conceal the crime, he dragged Jones's body into the living room, piled objects on top of it, and set the scene alight before watching from a bench as fire crews tackled the blaze. Less than 2 weeks later, Maidment's violence spiraled further when he carried out a string of knife-point robberies under the influence of cocaine, ecstasy, and cannabis. He terrorized victims within minutes of one another, before turning up at a McDonald's in Chadderton and telling staff to call police because he had killed someone. Greater Manchester Police condemned his actions as reckless and life-threatening, with Detective Duncan Thorpe branding him a particularly dangerous individual. Having already served time for a previous killing before his 2016 release, Maidment's return to murder so soon after freedom left the court with little choice but to impose the rare whole-life order, ensuring he will never be released. Alongside the murder conviction, he also received concurrent sentences for robbery and possession of a bladed weapon. Andrew Randall was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole-life order for the murder of his 7-week-old daughter, Jessica Randall, on the 21st of November 2005. He had also committed grievous bodily harm and multiple counts of sexual abuse against the infant. Jessica Randall was born 5 weeks prematurely and lived with her father Andrew and mother Sharon Park, who suffered from schizophrenia. Randall had a history of violent fantasies and a fascination with serial killers and horror films. He admitted that he had fantasized about harming Jessica almost daily from her birth. On the morning of the 21st of November 2005, Randall allegedly attempted to quiet his daughter by throwing her head first into the wooden arms of a settee. Forensic examinations revealed multiple injuries, including 9 broken ribs, a fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, and cuts to her face. Post-mortem reports concluded the abuse had continued almost continuously during Jessica's short life. Randall admitted murder, grievous bodily harm, and 4 counts of sexual abuse at Northampton Crown Court on the 15th of November 2006. On the 13th of March 2007, Judge Charles Wyde QC sentenced him to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. The judge described Randall as a sadistic killer whose crimes included a sexual element bound up with extreme violence. Randall had previously written poems about wanting to kill. Ian McLolin's criminal history spans decades and multiple murders. His first killing occurred in 1984, when he attacked 49-year-old Len Delgatti with a hammer and then strangled him. The jury convicted McLolin of manslaughter rather than murder on the 19th of September 1984, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a term later reduced to 8 years on appeal in June 1985. Just over a year after his release, in September 1990, McLolin committed his second murder, killing Peter Halls in Brighton. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in July 1992 at Lewes Crown Court, with the Lord Chief Justice recommending a minimum term of 14 years. On 13th July 2013, 21 years later, McLolin was released on temporary license. On that same day, he murdered Graham Buck, a man who had intervened while investigating his neighbor's cries for help. McLolin was convicted of both murder and robbery, and initially sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years, along with 8 years concurrent for the robbery. Due to a recent European Court of Human Rights ruling, the trial judge was unable to impose a whole life term at that time, meaning McLolin would not be eligible for parole until at least the age of 95. Following a February 2014 ruling by British judges confirming the legality of whole life tariffs, McLolin's 40-year minimum term was overturned, and he was handed a whole life order, ensuring that he will spend the remainder of his life in prison. John Childs, also known as Bruce Childs, is a British contract killer from East London who was convicted in 1979 for a series of murders carried out between 1974 and 1978. Despite his convictions, none of the victims' bodies were ever recovered, and no murder weapons were found. Childs implicated 2 associates, Terry Pinfold and Harry McKenny, in the killings, but both were later released in 2003 after the court concluded that Childs' testimony was unreliable, describing him as a pathological liar. Today, Childs is serving a whole life tariff, making it unlikely he will ever be released. Childs was arrested in September 1978 for a series of bank and security van robberies in Hertfordshire. In June 1979, he confessed to Detective Chief Superintendent Frank Cater that he had carried out 6 contract killings. The victims included Terence Terry Eve, Robert Brown, George Brett and his 10-year-old son Terry, Frederick Freddie Sherwood, and Ronald Andrews. At the Old Bailey, Childs was convicted on the 4th of December 1979 and sentenced to 6 concurrent life terms. During the trial, he turned Queen's evidence, claiming that Pinfold and McKenney had ordered the killings. He alleged that Eve was murdered to take over his business, that Brett and his son were lured under the pretense of work before being shot, and that Andrews and Sherwood were killed over personal disputes and debts. Childs also admitted he had considered killing McKenney with a crossbow out of fear. The co-accused, Pinfold, McKenney, Leonard Thompson, and Paul Morton Thurtle, were tried in October 1980. Childs' testimony played a central role, though the defense presented witnesses claiming he had lied to protect his wife Tina from being accused of murder. The jury convicted Pinfold and McKenney, while Thompson and Morton Thurtle were acquitted. McKenney received a life sentence and had to be restrained in court. Childs was later issued a whole-life tariff by at least one Home Secretary. While in prison, Childs made further admissions about his crimes. In 1986, he stated that Pinfold had only been convicted due to his own perjured evidence. Later, through letters and interviews with newspapers, he claimed to have dismembered and burned the bodies of his victims in a council flat in Poplar. In 1998, he reportedly confessed to committing 5 additional murders. Pinfold and McKenney repeatedly appealed their convictions. Initially unsuccessful, their convictions were overturned in December 2003 after the Court of Appeal ruled that Childs' evidence was unreliable. Psychiatric evaluation had found that Childs had a personality disorder that made him compulsively dishonest, information the original jury had not received. Childs' stories about the murders also shifted over time. Reports suggested that Eve might have been alive at one point, and that Childs had used multiple aliases, including the name Martin Jones. McKenney's former wife also claimed that much of Childs' account was fabricated. Childs had joined the British Army as a sapper, but was expelled after 9 months for burglary. Before his murders, he had a criminal record for theft, including motorbikes, and worked for Pinfold and McKenney. He was married and had 2 daughters, but his wife Tina divorced him following his conviction in 1982. Hakeim Kigundu, a 33-year-old man, was sentenced to a whole life term for the murder of his neighbours, Richard Burgess, 46, and Neil Morris, 45, after setting fire to their flat in Roe Court, Reading, Berkshire, on the 15th of December, 2021. The fire, which Kigundu deliberately started, also seriously injured 2 other residents. The attack was described by the court as premeditated and motivated by revenge after Kigundu became angry over complaints about his antisocial behavior and the loss of his job as a BT engineer. In the days leading up to the fire, he purchased 40 litres of petrol, a sledgehammer, and a vendetta mask, and even recorded a voice note stating his intention to kill his neighbours, creating an email address with the words, "Burn them all." Kigundu admitted to 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of causing grievous bodily harm, and 1 count of arson with intent to endanger life at Reading Crown Court in October 2022, and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order. During the Court of Appeal hearing, 3 judges, Lord Justice William Davis, Mr. Justice Murray, and Judge Robert Altham, dismissed his bid to have the sentence reduced, stating that his actions were sufficiently serious and egregious, with quite catastrophic consequences that could not be overstated. Lord Justice Davis emphasised that Kigundu had effectively been planning mass murder. Eyewitness accounts highlighted the scale and cruelty of the attack. Joel Richards, a survivor who suffered 3rd-degree burns and had to jump from a 2nd-floor window to escape, described seeing Kigundu laughing from his car outside as the building burned. The Court of Appeal upheld that the combination of premeditation, lethal intent, and the devastating impact on multiple victims justified the whole life sentence, confirming that Kigundu will remain in prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of release. Levi Belelffield, born Levi Rabbits, is a British serial killer, gapist, kidnapper, and burglar of Romani descent. His father died of leukemia when Belelffield was 10, and he was raised with his siblings on a council estate in southwest London. Belelffield later fathered 11 children with 5 different women, From an early age, he displayed criminal tendencies, with his first conviction for burglary at age 13. He went on to amass convictions for assaulting a police officer, theft, and driving offences, and by 2002, he had 9 convictions and nearly a year in prison. Investigators described him as a charming but highly violent individual, capable of switching instantly from affable to aggressive. Belelffield targeted young blonde women and was known to stalk and observe his victims in areas he knew well. He used his wheel-clamping business in West Drayton as a cover to move around and locate potential targets. His confirmed victims include Marsha McDonnell, a 19-year-old beaten over the head near her home in February 2003, Amélie Delagrange, a 22-year-old French student attacked at Twickenham Green in August 2004, Millie Dowler, a 13-year-old abducted and murdered in March 2002, and Kate Sheedy, then 18, who survived being deliberately run over in May 2004. He was arrested on 22 November 2004 for Delagrange's murder, and subsequently charged with multiple gapes, assaults, murders, and attempted murders spanning several years. On the 25th of February 2008, Belelffield was convicted of the murders of McDonnell and Delagrange and the attempted murder of Sheedy, receiving a whole life order. On 23 June 2011, he was convicted of murdering Millie Dowler and received a second whole life order, making him the first prisoner in the UK to be given 2 such sentences. Belelffield refused to attend court during some of his proceedings, citing perceived unfair media coverage. He is currently serving his sentence at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham, with no possibility of parole. Jaime Reynolds pleaded guilty to the murder of 17-year-old Georgia Williams, whom he lured to his home in Wellington, Shropshire, in May 2013. After killing her, he disposed of her body near Wrexham, North Wales. Her remains were discovered shortly after Reynolds was arrested in Glasgow several days later. Reynolds had a history of violent behaviour. In 2008, he attempted to strangle a girl, which resulted only in a final warning from police. In 2011, he drove his car into another girl's vehicle after she rejected his advances, but this incident was not linked to the earlier attack. Authorities, including the Justice Liaison Service and local police, were aware that Reynolds had viewed violent pornography and had created graphic images of young women and teenage girls he knew personally. However, these warnings were not treated with sufficient seriousness, and the potential victims were not alerted. Despite involvement from multiple agencies, there was no coordinated system to monitor Reynolds, leaving many who knew him unaware of his dangerous behavior. Following his conviction for Georgia Williams' murder, media reports suggested that the tragedy might have been prevented if police and social services had acted on prior information about Reynolds. Proper intervention could have led to monitoring him more closely or registering him as a sex offender, even if he had not yet been imprisoned for earlier offences. Reynolds, who was 22 when he committed the murder and 23 when he went to trial, admitted to the killing on 2 December 2013. His sentencing was delayed until the 19th of December, when the judge imposed a life sentence with a recommendation that he should never be released. Psychiatric reports presented during sentencing warned that Reynolds had the potential to become a serial killer and was likely to remain a serious threat to women throughout his life. At 22, Reynolds became one of the youngest individuals in British history to receive a whole-life tariff. Mark Martin, born on the 18th of October 1979, is a British serial killer who became known in the media as the Sneinton Strangler. He was an only child and suffered severe bullying at school due to a prominent birthmark under his left eye. His father spent time in prison, reportedly alongside the Cray twins. By the age of 16, Martin had turned to petty crime. In his early 20s, he married but was violent toward his wife, leading to their separation in 2004. Homeless by this time, Martin lived on the streets of Nottingham and became a feared figure within the homeless community. Alongside fellow rough sleepers, John Ashley and Dean Carr, he stole from others and gained a reputation as aggressive, volatile, and dominant, often described as the leader of the pack. Martin sought notoriety and openly boasted about wanting to become Nottingham's first serial killer. On 24th January 2005, he, Ashley, Carr, and 25-year-old homeless woman Ellen Frith were at a derelict flat on Marple Road in Nottingham. Martin attacked Frith, strangling her to death and then injecting her with a syringe before setting fire to the flat. Firefighters discovered her body after extinguishing the blaze. Witnesses later confirmed Martin, Ashley, and Carr had been present when the fire started. Martin even called the police days later to boast about the murder. Martin also admitted to killing two other homeless women, 18-year-old Katie Baxter and 26-year-old Zoe Pennick. Baxter had been lured to Martin's tent with the promise of cigarettes before being strangled, while Pennick went missing around the same time. Their bodies were later discovered under rubble near Martin's tent, and forensic analysis confirmed they had been killed between late December 2004 and early January 2005. All three men were tried at Nottingham Crown Court in January 2006. Martin and Ashley were charged with the murders of Baxter and Pennick, while Dean Carr was charged with Frith's murder. Witnesses from the homeless community testified about the defendants' confessions. Martin, as the ringleader, was convicted of all three murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order. Ashley received a 25-year minimum term for involvement in two murders, and Carr was given a 14-year minimum term for Frith's murder. Marcus Osborne was sentenced to a whole life order for the brutal murder of his ex-partner, Katie Higton, and her new boyfriend, Stephen Harnett. The killings were described by Mrs. Justice Lambert KC at Leeds Crown Court as ferocious, merciless and sustained, and Osborne will never be released. Days before the murders, Higton had told police she feared for her life. Osborne attacked her in a frenzied stabbing, inflicting 99 injuries. He then used her Snapchat account to lure Harnett to his death. After the killings, Osborne declared, "Romeo and Juliet, they can fucking die together now," appeared calm, and was even seen laughing. Evidence presented in court indicated that he gaped Higton when she was dead or dying and mutilated Harnett. The following morning, he invited a neighbour to view the bodies. Osborne from Huddersfield pleaded guilty to double murder, gape, and false imprisonment. The judge emphasised that his sentence was rare and reserved for the most extreme cases, noting that his actions were horrific and without mitigating factors apart from the guilty plea. The court found that both killings were sexually motivated, stemming from Osborne's jealousy. Higton and Osborne had been in a 5-year relationship during which he became coercive, controlling, and physically abusive, dictating what she could wear, whom she could see, and how she could use social media. Friends reported that Higton had changed from being fun, bubbly, and independent to posting about sadness online. The final straw was a violent assault that left her immobilized for several days. After leaving Osborne, she was determined not to return, but he had threatened her with death if she formed a new relationship. In addition to the whole life sentence for the murders, Osborne received 10 years imprisonment for the gape and false imprisonment charges, to run concurrently. Louis Deoicer was sentenced to a whole life order for the murder of Sergeant Matt Rahana, meaning he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Deoicer shot Rahana, 54, in the chest at point-blank range at a custody block in Croydon, South London, in September 2020, after smuggling a gun into the police station while handcuffed. His defense argued diminished responsibility, claiming Deoicer had an autistic meltdown caused by the stress of his arrest and confinement. But after a 3-week trial at Northampton Crown Court, a jury convicted him of murder. Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Johnson stated that Deoicer's actions were voluntary, controlled, and deliberate, emphasizing that autism was not to blame for the killing. Video footage showed that Rahana and other officers treated him with kindness, yet Deoicer concealed the weapon and made efforts to retrieve it while handcuffed. Rahana, originally from New Zealand, was the custody sergeant at the Windmill Road Custody Centre, where Deoicer was brought after being arrested for possession of cannabis and ammunition. During the attack, Deoicer also inflicted a self-shot gun wound to his neck, leaving him with brain damage and physical disability. Rahana's partner, Sue Bushby, described his murder as the most devastating event of her life, highlighting the trauma and grief caused by losing him in such a violent manner. Deoicer's background revealed a history of bullying, domestic abuse, and a late autism diagnosis, but he had lived independently, worked as a tax analyst at HMRC, and maintained a long-term relationship. Authorities found a large cache of weapons at his home, alongside material relating to right-wing and Islamic extremism and homophobia, though he later denied any interest in these ideologies. Deoicer will serve his sentence at HMP Belmarsh in southeast London and showed no visible emotion as he was informed he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Paul O'Hara was sentenced to a whole life term for murdering his girlfriend, Sherilee Shannon, just a year after being released for killing a previous partner. On 17th March, O'Hara forced his way into Miss Shannon's home in Rawtenstall, Greater Manchester, while she was reporting his domestic abuse to 2 attending police officers. He attacked the officers with a hammer before chasing Miss Shannon into the street, where he stabbed her to death. Neighbors witnessed the victim kneeling in the street as O'Hara delivered repeated blows. A post-mortem revealed she died from multiple stab wounds. O'Hara had previously been convicted of murdering another girlfriend in 1998 under strikingly similar circumstances and was released on license in 2013. At Preston Crown Court, O'Hara admitted to murder and to wounding and assaulting the police officers. Recorder of Preston, Judge Anthony Russell QC, described him as very dangerous to women, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of release. The attacks on the officers resulted in additional sentences of 10 years and 2 years to run concurrently with his whole life term. Detective Superintendent Eddie Thistlethwaite called the killing truly horrendous and described O'Hara as a predatory and violent individual who manipulated his victims and showed little or no remorse. Miss Shannon's family said her death had left them torn apart and tormented, adding that their lives would never be the same. They praised Lancashire police, particularly the officers who had tried to save her life. David Baxenddale, 40, is a convicted killer who carried out a brutal stabbing murder of Sarah Thomas, a 38-year-old mother of 3, before fleeing the UK to Spain. The attack occurred on the 10th of May at Thomas's flat in Nutfield, Surrey, where Baxenddale stabbed her multiple times. Paramedics arrived, but were unable to save her. Her body was found by her boyfriend on the living room floor, covered in blood. Baxenddale fled immediately after the attack, first to Walton on the Hill, where his mother lived, and then to Portsmouth. Using his brother's passport, he boarded a ferry to Saint-Malo, France, before traveling to Fuengirola near Marbella, Spain. He was recognized by a member of the public following a police media appeal and was subsequently extradited back to the UK. Evidence collected by Surrey police linked Baxenddale directly to the murder. His fingerprints were found in blood at the crime scene, and a blood-stained jacket, hidden in a garden, was recovered. Another bag containing clothing with traces of his DNA and Thomas's blood, along with blood-stained trainers, further confirmed his guilt. Baxenddale had a long history of violent behavior, particularly involving knives. In 2001, while in Spain, he was jailed for murdering a man, stabbing him 14 times under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He was deported to the UK in 2008 and released from prison in 2009 under the supervision of the Surrey Probation Service. At Guildford Crown Court, Baxenddale was sentenced to a whole life term, reflecting the severity of his crime and his repeated violent history. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Hayes described him as an extremely dangerous individual whose propensity for violence knows no bounds, underscoring the threat he posed both historically and at the time of Sarah Thomas's murder. Leroy Campbell was a convicted gapist and violent offender who went on to brutally gape and murder 37-year-old district nurse Lisa Skidmore in her home in Bilston, West Midlands, just months after being released from prison. In November 2016, Campbell climbed through her bedroom window using a ladder after watching the property in the days before. Over a period of 2 hours, he subjected Lisa to a violent sexual assault before strangling her to death. When her elderly mother Margaret unexpectedly arrived at the house, Campbell attacked her too, punching and strangling her before leaving her for dead. He then set fire to the bedroom where Lisa's body lay, and turned on the gas in an attempt to destroy evidence, but Margaret was rescued by neighbors and firefighters. Campbell was arrested days later and later pleaded guilty to gape, murder, attempted murder, and arson with intent to endanger life. The judge sentenced him to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. The case highlighted catastrophic failings in the probation service, which had been supervising Campbell after his release. Campbell had previously served 17 years for a similar attack on another woman and had openly told his probation officer that he felt like doing it again and had started looking at open windows. Despite these clear warning signs, he was not recalled to prison. An inquest later concluded that both the police and probation services had failed Lisa, and that their failings made more than a minimal contribution to her death. For Lisa's grieving family, including her mother who survived the attack, the knowledge that her murder could have been prevented has been especially painful. Campbell's crimes not only robbed the community of a kind and much-loved nurse, but also exposed systemic flaws in the management of high-risk offenders, leaving her family determined to seek justice and lasting change. Anthony Russell was sentenced to a whole-life prison term for the murders of Julie Williams, her son David Williams, and Nicole McGregor near Leamington Spa in October 2020. The killings took place during a week-long spree in which Russell also gaped McGregor, who was 5 months pregnant. The court described his actions as exceptionally brutal, deliberate, and cold-blooded, with each death resulting from a separate, sustained act of violence. David Williams was strangled with a lanyard in his home, and his body was discovered 5 days later under his bed with 87 injuries. Police believe Russell killed him because he mistakenly thought David was involved with his girlfriend. Shortly afterward, Russell killed David's mother, Julie Williams, inflicting 113 injuries, apparently to prevent her from speaking to the police. Nicole McGregor was lured into woodland at Newbold Common, gaped, and strangled. She had met Russell just hours earlier and was reportedly drawn into the woods under the pretense of drugs rather than sexual activity. After her murder, Russell pretended to help her partner search for her while making cruel remarks about her pregnancy. During sentencing, Mr. Justice Wall emphasized that whole-life orders are reserved for the most serious cases, stating that Russell's crimes fell squarely within that category. Russell refused to attend the hearing, and attempts to get him into a prison van reportedly placed staff in danger. Prosecutors highlighted that his denial of gaping McGregor forced her family to relive her death during the trial, while his own barrister described him as a sad and pathetic individual. The court emphasized his capacity for extreme violence and manipulation, noting his willingness to harm anyone, known or unknown. The murders prompted one of the largest manhunts in recent UK history. Russell fled the area by attacking and stealing a car from a 78-year-old man, but was eventually arrested when police found him hiding in the stolen vehicle. John Maiden, a 37-year-old man from Cheetham Hill, North Manchester, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of his 12-year-old niece, Tia Rigg. Maiden lured Tia to his home under the pretext of babysitting, but once she arrived, he drugged, gaped, tortured, and killed her. After the murder, he called the police himself and was described as chillingly calm when officers arrived. The court heard that Maiden had long been obsessed with violent pornography and child abuse material, maintaining an extensive library of images and literature detailing gape, torture, and methods of killing. Prosecutors argued that the murder was premeditated and carried out to act on these fantasies. Forensic evidence revealed that Tia had been stabbed in the abdomen and suffered severe internal injuries, and her agony had been prolonged. On the day of the murder, Maiden had asked his sister to send Tia to his home. She arrived shortly before 3 p.m, and within 45 minutes, she was dead. During police interviews, Maiden admitted to gaping and killing Tia, though he also claimed to hear voices in his head. At Manchester Crown Court, Mr. Justice Keith condemned Maiden's actions as horrific, emphasizing that Tia had trusted her uncle and that the crime had been both deliberate and sexually motivated. The judge ruled that this was an exceptional case requiring a whole life sentence. Tia's mother, Lynn Rigg, and other family members attended the court proceedings. Lynn described the murder as a nightmare that would never end, but expressed relief that justice had been done and that Tia could now rest in peace. Detective Chief Inspector David Warren, who led the investigation, said that Maiden had caused immense suffering to someone he was meant to love and would now spend the rest of his life reflecting on his actions. Damian Bendal was sentenced to a whole-life prison term for the murders of his pregnant partner, Terry Harris, her son, John Bennett, 13, daughter Lacey Bennett, 11, and Lacey's friend, Connie Gent, also 11, at a house in Chandos Crescent, Killamarsh, Derbyshire, in September 2021. Bendal killed the 4 victims with a claw hammer, inflicting brutal head and upper body injuries, and also gaped Lacey. The attacks were carried out over the course of an evening on the 18th of September, and the victims were discovered by police the following morning, after Bendal alerted his mother that he had harmed himself. Forensic evidence indicated that Lacey was attacked and gaped both downstairs and upstairs, with a ligature applied to her neck contributing to her death. Bendal admitted to all charges at Derby Crown Court, including the 4 murders and the gape of Lacey. Police body cam footage showed him calmly admitting outside the house, "I've murdered 4 people," and acknowledging that his partner was pregnant, joking that it could have been 5 murders. After the killings, he left the house with John's games console, intending to sell it for drugs. He had been under the influence of cocaine and cannabis at the time. Mr. Justice Sweeney sentenced Bendal to a whole-life order, stating that the attacks were vicious, brutal, and cruel, and emphasizing that none of the victims stood a chance. The Crown Prosecution Service argued that only a whole-life tariff was appropriate, and Bendal himself agreed, with his defense barrister confirming that nothing less would be warranted given the scale and severity of his crimes. Kyrie Sardala, a 25-year-old Libyan refugee, was sentenced to a whole-life term after carrying out a deadly stabbing attack in Forbury Gardens, Reading, on the 20th of June 2020. Using an 8-inch kitchen knife, Sardala randomly attacked 2 groups of people socializing in the park, killing 3 men and seriously injuring 3 others. The victims, all friends and members of the local LGBT+ community, died from single stab wounds to the neck and back. Sardala was apprehended by police within minutes of the attack and later charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Born into a middle-class family in Libya, Sardala had sought asylum in the UK in 2012, eventually being granted permission to remain in 2018. He had a history of criminal convictions between 2015 and 2019, including violent offences and possession of a bladed article. Intelligence agencies had previously monitored him over concerns about extremist intentions, and he had been released from prison just 17 days before the attack. During the assault, witnesses reported him shouting, "Allahu Akbar," and after his arrest, he admitted that he believed he would attain paradise for his actions. Investigators later found pro-ISIS materials and videos on his phone. Sardala pleaded guilty in November 2020, and in January 2021, the judge confirmed the attack as a terrorist act designed to advance an extremist Islamic cause, handing him a whole life sentence with no possibility of release. The inquest, concluded in April 2024, found that the murders were preventable, highlighting significantly troubling failings in the management of Sardala by mental health services, police, and other authorities. Memorials have since been established in Forbury Gardens to honour the victims James Furlong, Joe Ritchie Bennett, and David Wales, ensuring their deaths are not forgotten. Brian Whitelock was sentenced to a whole life term for the torture and murder of Wendy Buckney, 71, at her home in Clydach, near Swansea. Whitelock had previously served 18 years in prison for a double killing and had been released after being deemed low risk by the parole board. The attack on Buckney was described by Mr. Justice Griffiths as a frenzy of violence, resulting in a brutal, terrifying death. Whitelock, who was under the influence of Valium and alcohol at the time, carried out the assault for pleasure and derived sexual satisfaction from it. The judge confirmed that he will never be considered for parole. Whitelock's prior convictions include the 2001 murders of Nicholas Morgan, whom he beat to death with a pickaxe handle, or hammer, and his own brother, Glenn, who died of smoke inhalation, when Whitelock set fire to Morgan's body in an attempt to cover up the crime. After becoming eligible for parole in 2018, Whitelock was released in January 2019, following an offender assessment that deemed his risk of committing another serious offence low, though it noted the risk could increase with drug or alcohol misuse. He was recalled later that year for attacking a supermarket worker, but was released again after demonstrating engagement with a drug and alcohol support program. Buckney had employed Whitelock to do odd jobs at her flat, despite concerns from her relatives that he was dangerous. In the weeks before the murder, neighbours called emergency services over his behaviour, but he discharged himself from hospital after receiving treatment. During the attack in August 2022, Whitelock assaulted Buckney with a knife, table leg, and wooden shelf, and sexually assaulted her. The jury heard that he may have been taking up to 30 diazepam tablets daily, drinking a crate of lager, and smoking cannabis at the time. Kyle Marcus Clifford was sentenced to a whole life term for the murders of Carol Hunt, 61, and her daughters Louise Hunt, 25, and Hannah Hunt, 28, at their home in Bushey, Hertfordshire, on the 9th of July 2024. Clifford, Louise's ex-boyfriend, carried out the killings following the breakdown of their relationship on 26 June 2024. In the days leading up to the murders, Clifford purchased a crossbow, 6 bolts, a butcher knife, a CO2 Glock air pistol, petrol, duct tape, and rope. He planned his attack meticulously, surveilling the property and researching the household's routines. Clifford arrived at the Hunt home at 2:32 p.m., carrying a knife in a rucksack. He stabbed Carol Hunt at the door after claiming he was returning some of Louise's belongings. He then retrieved a crossbow from his car, waited for Louise to enter the house, and restrained and gaped her over several hours. He later used Louise's phone to check when her father would return and researched smoke detectors, allegedly planning to burn the house down. Clifford shot Louise with the crossbow at 6:49 p.m. and then shot Hannah shortly afterward at 6:54 p.m. Both women died from their injuries. Carol Hunt had already succumbed to her stab wounds, and Hannah was found still alive when emergency services arrived, but was pronounced dead at the scene. After fleeing, Clifford attempted to take his own life in Lavender Hill Cemetery near his home in the London borough of Enfield by shooting himself in the chest with the crossbow, which left him paralysed from the waist down. He was treated at the Royal London Hospital before being remanded in custody. Clifford was previously a soldier in the Queen's Dragoon Guards and a former security guard. His brother Bradley Clifford is also a convicted murderer. Clifford was arrested on the 11th of July 2024 and charged with 3 counts of murder, false imprisonment, possession of an offensive weapon, and gape. Initially pleading not guilty, he later pleaded guilty to the murders, false imprisonment, and possession of an offensive weapon on the 22nd of January 2025, and was found guilty of the gape charge. On 11th March 2025, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Judge Joel Benethan described Clifford as a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt, and noted the letters he had written to his family prior to the attacks were dripping with self-pity. In May 2004, Jeshma Raithatha, a 17-year-old A-level student, was walking home near her West London residence when she was brutally attacked by Viktor Dembowskis, a 43-year-old Latvian man with a history of sexual violence. Dembowskis gaped Jeshma twice before stabbing her through the heart and leaving her body concealed in undergrowth, where it was discovered 8 days later. After the murder, he fled to his hometown of Livani, Latvia, but left behind key evidence at the scene, including his keys and Jeshma's blood-stained jewelry, which allowed police to track him down. Authorities revealed that Dembowskis had previously served 2 prison sentences in Latvia for violent sexual assaults. In 1990, he attacked a kindergarten teacher at knife point, and in 1997, he committed another gape. Despite this criminal record, he had been allowed into the UK, a point Jeshma's parents later raised publicly. Following his extradition, Dembowskis was tried at the Old Bailey, where the jury unanimously convicted him of murder after only 2 hours of deliberation. Judge Peter Beaumont sentenced Dembowskis to 3 life terms, recommending that he should never be released. During sentencing, the judge emphasized his complete lack of remorse and the devastating impact of his actions on Jeshma's family. In a statement outside court, her parents, Suresh and Manjula Raithatha, expressed their shock that a convicted sex offender had been admitted into Britain, stating that while justice had been served, the loss of their daughter was irreparable. Philip Hegarty, born in 1956, was convicted in 2004 for the brutal murder of his close friend Derek Bennett, 41, in Cardiff in 2003. After attacking Bennett with a hammer-like object, Hegarty wrapped the body in a rug, placed it in a stolen Renault Laguna, and set it on fire in a car park. The assault was so savage that Bennett's body could only be identified through dental records. In addition to the murder, Hegarty stole approximately £3,000 from his victim, who had been carrying both cash and illicit drugs at the time. During the investigation, forensic evidence tied Hegarty directly to the crime. Blood from Bennett was found in Hegarty's flat and on his clothing, and fingerprints were located on the blood-stained wall in the cellar. CCTV footage also placed Hegarty with Bennett on the night of the attack. Prosecutors detailed Hegarty's prior history of violent behavior, including attempted murder and robberies targeting elderly individuals. Despite Hegarty's claim that Bennett was, like the brother I never had, and that the murder was impossible, the jury found him guilty. At Swansea Crown Court, Mr. Justice Roderick Evans described Hegarty as a dangerous man and imposed a life sentence with a whole life order, meaning Hegarty would never be released. The judge emphasized the brutality of the crime, noting that Bennett's skull was shattered into 23 pieces and it took over an hour for him to die, stating the motive was robbery. Following the sentence, Bennett's brother expressed relief that justice had been served. Hegarty's solicitor announced plans to appeal the conviction, arguing that Hegarty was shocked by the verdict. Jeremy Neville Bamber, born Jeremy Paul Marsham on the 13th of January 1961, is a British convicted mass murderer. He was found guilty of the 1985 White House farm killings in Tollishunt, Darcy, Essex, in which 5 members of his adoptive family were shot and killed. His adoptive parents, Neville and June Bamber, his adoptive sister, Sheila Caffell, and Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons. The prosecution argued that Bamber carried out the murders to secure a substantial inheritance and attempted to frame his sister, who suffered from schizophrenia. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and Bamber is serving a life sentence with a whole life tariff, leaving him ineligible for parole. Jeremy Bamber was born to Juliet Wheeler and Leslie Bryan Marsham in 1961, but was placed for adoption by the Church of England Children's Society at 6 months old. He was adopted by Neville and June Bamber, wealthy farmers living at White House Farm in Essex. The couple had previously adopted a daughter, Sheila, 4 years earlier. Bamber attended St Nicholas Primary and Malden Court Prep School, before moving to the boarding school Gresham's in Norfolk. Although he initially left school without qualifications, he later earned 7 O-levels at a sixth form college in Colchester. He was known for his charm and reportedly had relationships with both men and women. After leaving school, Bamber travelled to Australia and New Zealand, where he reportedly became involved in petty crime and claimed to have smuggled heroin. Upon returning to the UK, he worked in restaurants and bars before joining the family farm business. Bamber also owned a share in the family's caravan site, Osea Road Camp Sites Limited, and lived rent-free in a cottage near White House Farm. Weeks before the murders, he admitted to breaking into and stealing from the caravan site, a fact revealed after his girlfriend came forward as a witness. On 7th August 1985, Bamber reported the shootings to the police, claiming his sister Sheila had gone berserk with his father's rifle. When officers arrived, they discovered Sheila dead in the bedroom with the rifle against her throat, her parents dead nearby, and her twin sons in another room. The family had been shot 25 times, mostly at close range. The prosecution contested Bamber's account, arguing that Neville Bamber could not have telephoned his son due to his injuries. The rifle silencer was already in place, and Sheila lacked the strength to overpower her father and handle the gun. The evidence suggested that Sheila could not have committed the killings herself. Despite repeated challenges, Bamba's defense has been unable to overturn the conviction. Bamba is held at HM Prison Wakefield, where he is engaged in educational and charitable activities, including helping fellow inmates with reading and writing and transcribing books into Braille. Over the years, he has faced attacks from other prisoners, including a knife assault. He has also maintained a network of supporters outside prison and corresponded with women while incarcerated. Bamba has repeatedly sought to overturn his conviction or challenge his whole life tariff. Appeals to the Court of Appeal in 2002 and further applications to the Criminal Cases Review Commission in 2004 and 2012 were unsuccessful. In March 2021, a new application was lodged with the CCRC, supported by previously withheld documents, raising multiple grounds of appeal. As of 2025, he has spent 39 years in prison. Bamba has also attempted to recover a share of the family estate and profits from the caravan site, but courts have consistently ruled that his conviction prevents him from inheriting. Lawrence Bearton, born 30 December 1959, is an English convicted serial killer. In 1996, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murder of two elderly sisters in Rotherham, and in 2023, he received a whole life sentence for a third murder committed while he was on license. Bearton's first known crime occurred on 25 June 1995, when 79-year-old Aileen Doodle and her 72-year-old sister, Elsie Gregory, caught him and his accomplice Michael Pluck stealing from their home. In response, Bearton and Pluck bludgeoned and suffocated the sisters to death, then piled the living room furniture over their bodies and set it on fire. Both men were sentenced to life imprisonment at Sheffield Crown Court in 1996. Michael Pluck died in HMP Rye Hill on the 13th of February 2012 after failed appeals in 2002 and 2010. Bearton was released on license in 2017, recalled to prison in 2018, and released again in 2020. On 9th November 2021, while living in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, he murdered his 73-year-old neighbour, Pauline Quinn, by beating her to death with her own coffee table, causing traumatic head injuries. His substance abuse was cited as a contributing factor to the killing. Following the case, the Probation Service conducted a review, released in January 2023, acknowledging failings in Bearton's supervision. Brendan Clark Smith, the local MP for Bassetlaw, called for a public inquiry. On the 20th of December 2023, Bearton was given a whole life sentence, ensuring he will never be released from prison. The Probation Service issued an apology to the victims' families for its failings. Jeremy Thorpe Wing, aged 61 at the time of sentencing, was convicted of sexually abusing two children, who were 7 years old when the abuse began. He also faced allegations involving a third child. During a police raid on his home, authorities found toys, motorized go-karts, water pistols, video games, and recordings showing Wing and another man, Brian Hogg, abusing children. Both Wing and Hogg, who had met while serving prison sentences for prior sexual offences, were found guilty of 2 counts of gape so severe that the victims would suffer lifelong physical injuries. Judge Andrew Patience determined that neither man would ever be safe to release, sentencing them to life imprisonment with a whole life order at Maidstone Crown Court, a sentence rarely given for crimes other than murder. Hogg's life sentence was later overturned. Stephen John Port, known as the Grinder Killer, is a British serial killer and serial gapist who was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order in 2016 for the murders of 4 young men and multiple sexual assaults. Born in Southend-on-Sea in 1975 and raised in Dagenham, Port was described as a quiet, isolated figure with a childlike personality who often exhibited strange behaviour even as an adult. He lived alone in Barking, London, where he worked as a chef and used online dating and hookup apps to lure his victims. Posing under false identities, Port drugged young men with lethal doses of GHB, a date gape drug, before gaping and, in 4 cases, killing them. His victims included Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor, whose bodies were found either outside Port's flat or in a nearby churchyard between 2014 and 2015. He attempted to cover up his crimes with staged scenarios, including planting a fake, taking his own life note on one victim. Port's conviction came after a series of damning revelations about the Metropolitan Police's handling of the deaths. Despite the striking similarities between the cases and repeated warnings from the victims' families and members of the LGBT community, officers initially failed to link the deaths and dismissed them as non-suspicious overdoses. This catalogue of investigative failures led to widespread criticism, multiple inquiries, and compensation awarded to the victims' families. In total, Port was found guilty of 4 murders, several gapes, sexual assaults, and drugging offences against at least 11 known victims. His case not only exposed him as one of Britain's most notorious modern serial killers, but also highlighted systemic failings in how the police handled crimes involving gay men and date-gape drugs. Peter Howard Moore, born on 19 September 1946, was a British serial killer who worked as a cinema manager in North Wales, at locations including Bugilt, Holyhead, Kinmel Bay, and Denbigh. Between September and December 1995, Moore murdered 4 men, committing the attacks for fun. Due to his habit of wearing a black shirt and tie, he became known as the Man in Black. In addition to the murders, he carried out 39 sexual assaults on men over a 20-year period across North Wales and the Merseyside area. During his trial, Moore claimed that a fictional lover he called Jason, after the horror movie character from Friday the 13th, was responsible for the murders. The jury rejected this defense and found him guilty on all counts. In November 1996, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he should never be released. While in Wakefield Prison, Moore became acquainted with fellow serial killer Harold Shipman. In June 2008, the High Court confirmed that Moore would spend the remainder of his life in prison. He later challenged his sentence in the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that whole life orders violated human rights. His appeal was initially rejected in 2012, although a 2013 ECHR ruling clarified that prisoners must have the possibility of review or release to meet human rights standards. Subsequent legal challenges have upheld the validity of whole life sentences under certain circumstances. Moore remains imprisoned, and rumours of his death in 2011 were false. Robert John Maudsley, born on 26 June 1953, is an English serial killer known for the murder of 4 people, including 1 killing in a psychiatric hospital and 2 more committed while already serving a life sentence in prison. He became infamous in the media as Hannibal the Cannibal, though reports that he ate part of a victim's brain were later proven false. Maudsley remains Britain's longest-serving prisoner in solitary confinement. Maudsley was the 4th of 12 children, born in Speke, Liverpool. As a young child, he and 3 of his older siblings were placed in a Catholic orphanage in Crosby. At age 8, his parents took him and his siblings back, but Maudsley endured ongoing physical abuse from his father. He later reported being sexually abused by his father, experiences that left deep psychological scars. As a teenager, Maudsley attempted to take his own life several times and sought psychiatric help, reporting that he heard voices urging him to kill his parents. Reflecting later on his early years, he said that if he had acted against his parents in 1970, none of these people would have died, referring to his later victims. In 1974, Maudsley killed John Farrell in Wood Green, London. Farrell had offered Maudsley a sexual encounter and showed him photographs of children he had abused. Maudsley voluntarily surrendered to the police, requesting psychiatric treatment. He was deemed unfit to stand trial and committed to Broadmoor Hospital. 3 years later, in 1977, Maudsley and fellow patient David Cheeseman tortured and killed David Francis, another Broadmoor inmate convicted of child molestation. The attack, lasting approximately 9 hours, was reportedly motivated by revenge for an alleged assault on a friend. Both men had prepared for the killing by rearranging furniture to barricade the room. Maudsley was convicted of manslaughter and transferred to Wakefield Prison, though he expressed a desire to return to Broadmoor. In July 1978, Maudsley killed 2 more inmates at Wakefield in a single day. His first victim, Salney Darwood, was serving time for sexual assault and the murder of his wife. Maudsley invited him into his cell, garroted and stabbed him, then hid the body. Later, he sought another target and murdered William Roberts, who was imprisoned for attempting to strangle a young girl. Maudsley stabbed Roberts and bludgeoned him against a wall. Afterward, he calmly informed prison staff that the next roll call would be too short. Maudsley has stated that he targets only sex offenders, describing himself as a threat exclusively to those convicted of sexual crimes. Mark Richard Hobson was a British spree killer responsible for the deaths of 4 people in North Yorkshire in 2004. Growing up in a seemingly stable family, Hobson lived with his parents and 2 sisters before moving to Selby later in childhood. He married his childhood sweetheart in 1993, and they had a daughter. But by 1999, Hobson abruptly left his family, turning to heavy drinking and drug use. He later worked as a club doorman, landscape gardener, and at a power station, though his life increasingly spiraled out of control. Hobson's killing spree began on the 10th of July 2004, when he murdered his girlfriend Claire Sanderson in their shared flat in Campbellsforth. He beat her 17 times with a hammer, strangled her, and wrapped her body in bin bags. A week later, he lured Claire's twin sister Diane to the flat under the pretense of visiting her sister, then tortured and murdered her, biting off her nipple and sexually assaulting her before strangling her to death. The following day, Hobson killed an elderly couple, James and Joan Britton, in their home in York. Hobson had meticulously planned the murders, keeping notes detailing his intentions, including supplies and a list of potential victims. Hobson was apprehended on the 25th of July 2004 at a petrol station near York after an 8-day nationwide manhunt. During his arrest, he reportedly exclaimed, "I'm a fucking killer, aren't I?" At Leeds Crown Court in April 2005, he pled guilty to all 4 murders. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed he was sane at the time of the crimes. Judge Mr. Justice Gregson described the killings as beyond words in their severity and sentenced Hobson to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he never be released. Despite Hobson's appeal to reduce his sentence due to his guilty plea, the Court of Appeal upheld the original ruling, citing the horrific nature of the crimes. While in prison, Hobson was involved in violent incidents, including scalding fellow inmate Ian Huntley with boiling water. Arthur Simpson Kent, the partner of former EastEnders actress Sian Blake, was sentenced to a whole life tariff for the brutal murders of Blake and their 2 young sons, Zachary, 8, and Eamon, 4. In December, after learning that Blake intended to leave him and take the children, Simpson Kent attacked them in their home in Erith, southeast London. The court heard that Blake, who had motor neurone disease, would have been unable to defend herself. All 3 victims were struck on the head and then stabbed in the neck or throat with a small axe. Simpson Kent then buried their bodies in the garden and attempted to cover up the crime by painting over the bloodstains before fleeing to Ghana the following month. He was arrested at Heathrow Airport after being extradited and admitted to the murders. Mr. Justice Singh described the killings as involving a significant degree of premeditation and planning, particularly with regard to the 2 boys, and highlighted the serious aggravating factors, including the vulnerability of the victims due to age and disability. Simpson Kent attempted to explain his actions as a moment when something just snapped, claiming a mental blank and a focus on acting rather than thinking, but the judge rejected his claims of depression of intent as mitigating factors. The case shocked the public, particularly because of Blake's previous career as an actress and the extreme violence inflicted on her and her children. The court concluded that Simpson Kent's crimes were so grave that he must never be released, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Anthony Arkwright is a British spree killer who, over a period of 56 hours in August 1988, murdered 3 people in Wath-upon-Dearne, South Yorkshire. He is also suspected of a 4th killing, although that charge was left on file by the trial judge. At just 21 years old at the time of the murders, Arkwright became the youngest individual in the UK to receive a whole life tariff. Arkwright was born into a mining community in Wath-upon-Dearne. He was one of 5 siblings, abandoned by his mother at an early age, while his father worked as a miner. Spending much of his childhood in care homes, he struggled academically and drifted into crime, including time in a borstal. By 21, He was employed by a scrap metal business in Mexborough, South Yorkshire, but was dismissed on 26 August 1988 due to poor attendance. His killing spree began shortly after this dismissal. Arkwright's first victim was his 68-year-old grandfather, Stanislav Pudoikas. Arkwright stabbed him at his allotment, leaving him paralyzed, before crushing his skull with a heavy hammer. He then killed his grandfather's 73-year-old housekeeper, Elsa Chronodite, while stealing £3,000 in savings. The bodies of both victims went undiscovered for 6 days. Arkwright's third victim was his neighbor, Raymond Ford, an unemployed former teacher who had previously reported Arkwright for theft. On the 28th of August, Arkwright entered Ford's flat wearing only a devil mask and brutally stabbed him, leaving him to die among the chaos of his own home. Remarkably, Arkwright was questioned and released by police on unrelated charges before Ford's death was discovered. On 29th August, Arkwright attacked another neighbor, Marcus Law, a 25-year-old in a wheelchair. He stabbed Law repeatedly, attempted to gut him, gouged out his eyes, and desecrated his body with cigarettes. Law's mother discovered his body, prompting Arkwright's arrest. He confessed to 4 murders, although one remained unproven in court. While awaiting trial at HMP Hull, Arkwright attempted to be declared insane, smearing his cell walls with feces to demonstrate delusions of grandeur. After assessment at Rampton Hospital, psychiatrists deemed him sane and fit to plead. At Sheffield Crown Court in July 1989, Arkwright pleaded guilty to 3 murders and received a life sentence. The prosecution described him as an evil fantasist, with aspirations for notoriety akin to Jack the Ripper. The 4th suspected murder was left unresolved, with the judge ordering the case to lie on file. In 2003, legislative changes allowed certain life sentences to carry no possibility of parole. Arkwright was among those affected, receiving a whole life tariff. Challenges were later raised at the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that whole life sentences without review were inhumane. However, the Court of Appeal upheld the legality of such sentences, affirming that Arkwright would remain in prison for life. John William Cooper, also known as the Bullseye Killer, is a Welsh serial killer convicted for a series of brutal murders and sexual assaults in Pembrokeshire. Born on 3 September 1944, Cooper had a long history of criminal behavior, beginning in his late teens with theft, assault, and disorderly conduct. Over the years, his criminality escalated to armed robbery, burglary, and ultimately multiple murders. Cooper gained notoriety for the 1985 double murder of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas at Scoveston Park, when he tied them up and shot them before burning down their farmhouse. 4 years later, in 1989, he killed another couple, Peter and Gwenda Dixon, during a holiday in Pembrokeshire. Armed with a sawn-off shotgun, he forced the couple to reveal their bank details, robbed them, and then shot them in the face at point-blank range. In 1996, he sexually assaulted and gaped 2 teenage girls while holding a group of 5 teenagers at gunpoint in a wooded area in his hometown of Milford Haven. Cooper was also involved in around 30 burglaries and violent robberies over his criminal career. For decades, Cooper eluded justice for the murders. He was convicted of robbery and burglary in 1998 and released from prison in 2009. Following advances in DNA and forensic science, a cold case review in 2009 connected him to the murders, and evidence, including his shotgun and DNA traces, analyzed by forensic scientist Angela Gallup, led to his arrest. On the 26th of May 2011, Cooper was convicted at the Crown Court and sentenced to 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Due to the extreme brutality of his crimes, he was also given a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. The presiding judge, John Griffith Williams, emphasized that the murders were of such evil wickedness that life imprisonment truly meant life. Arthur Hutchinson, born 19th February 1941 in Hartlepool, County Durham, is an English criminal who gained notoriety for committing a triple murder in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, in October 1983. He remains in prison and has mounted multiple legal challenges to overturn his life sentence. Before the murders, Hutchinson had already spent over 5 years in prison for the attempted murder of his half-brother Dino. He also had several prior convictions for sexual offences. On the 28th of September 1983, he was arrested on suspicion of theft, burglary, and gape. During the arrest, he attempted to escape from Selby police station by jumping out of a window, injuring his knee on barbed wire. After evading capture for 3.5 weeks, Hutchinson broke into the home of the Leitner family in Dorey, Sheffield, late on the 23rd of October 1983. Inside, he murdered Basil Leitner, 59, his wife Avril, 55, and their son Richard, 28, by stabbing them to death. He then gaped their 18-year-old daughter, Nicola, at knife point. The family had only hours earlier hosted the wedding reception of their other daughter, Suzanne. Investigators believe Hutchinson may have originally intended to commit a robbery. Hutchinson was identified through a combination of evidence, including a description given by Nicola Leitner, a palm print left on a champagne glass, and a dental impression left on a block of cheese. He remained on the run for 2 more weeks, moving through Barnsley, Nottinghamshire, Manchester, York, and Scarborough, until being captured on a farm in Hartlepool on the 5th of November 1983. Police were able to trace him through a phone call he had made to his mother. Hutchinson's trial began in September 1984. During proceedings, he accused a Sunday Mirror reporter, Mike Barron, of committing the murders, but the jury rejected this claim. After deliberating for 4 hours, the jury found him guilty of the 3 murders and the gape of Nicola Leitner. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommended minimum term of 18 years, which could have allowed parole in 2002 if deemed safe. However, the Home Secretary, Leon Britton, imposed a whole life tariff, ensuring Hutchinson would never be released. Hutchinson challenged his sentence multiple times. In May 2008, he argued at the High Court that a whole life tariff violated his human rights, but the appeal was rejected. A second appeal later that year was similarly unsuccessful. In 2013, the European Court of Human Rights initially ruled that whole life sentences breached human rights, but Hutchinson lost a further appeal in February 2015. The court held that such sentences are acceptable, provided they are reviewed within 25 years. Hutchinson continued to challenge his sentence, and his case was referred to the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights in June 2015. On 17 January 2017, the Grand Chamber upheld the UK's right to impose whole-life orders in appropriate cases. John Francis Duffy, born 1958, and David Mulcahy, born 1959, were British criminals responsible for a series of gapes and murders targeting women and children near railway stations in southern England during the 1980s. Their crimes earned them the nicknames the Railway Killers, with Duffy often referred to as the Railway Murderer by the media. Duffy and Mulcahy were lifelong friends from North London, who shared a disturbing fascination with violence from a young age. While still at school, they were expelled for cruelty to animals, foreshadowing their later crimes. The pair began their attacks in 1982, gaping women near railway stations in and around North London. Over the next few years, their assaults continued, increasing in frequency and severity. Their crimes culminated in several murders, including that of 19-year-old Alison Day in December 1985. Day was abducted near Hackney Wick Station, sexually assaulted, forced across live railway tracks, and ultimately strangled with her blouse. Her body was weighted with stones and disposed of in the River Lea. The murders escalated with the killing of 15-year-old Marcia Tamboza in Surrey in April 1986. She was knocked from her bicycle with a wire, gaped, beaten with a rock, strangled, and her body set on fire. Soon after, 29-year-old Anne Locke was abducted and murdered at Brookmans Park railway station. Police struggled to identify the attackers, as forensic science at the time lacked DNA analysis. Victims described Duffy as a smaller, ginger-haired man and Mulcahy as a larger accomplice. Investigators brought in psychologist David Cantor, who pioneered offender profiling in the UK, analysing crime scenes to predict the perpetrator's traits, habits, and behaviours. Cantor's work, helped focus the investigation and shaped future criminal profiling in Britain. Duffy was identified as a suspect in 1986 due to his criminal record, martial arts background, and detailed knowledge of the railway system, which matched the crimes. Items found at his home linked him to Marcia Tamboza's murder, and several victims positively identified him. Mulcahy, though known to police, initially avoided charges due to insufficient evidence. Duffy was arrested on the 26th of November 1986. He was tried in February 1988 and convicted of 2 murders and 4 gapes. Anne Locke's murder could not be fully prosecuted at that time due to a lack of forensic evidence. Duffy received a life sentence with a 30-year minimum tariff, later upgraded to a whole life tariff by the Home Secretary. In the late 1990s, Duffy began cooperating fully with authorities, giving detailed confessions and describing the involvement of Mulcahy. He explained how the pair refined their methods over time, gaining control over their victims with chilling precision. Duffy's confessions allowed police to connect him and Mulcahy to numerous unsolved gapes and murders. Mulcahy was arrested in February 1999 after surveillance, and DNA testing confirmed his involvement. In 2000, he was tried and convicted of 3 murders and 7 gapes, receiving multiple life sentences. Duffy also received additional sentences for his role in 17 offences of gape and conspiracy to gape, though he was already serving a life term. Neither man is expected to be released. The case of Duffy and Mulcahy demonstrated the effectiveness of offender profiling in complex serial crimes. George Norman Johnson, 47, is a convicted murderer who killed 89-year-old Florence May Habesh in her home in Rhyl, Denbighshire. Johnson, an odd job man, had previously been jailed for life in 1986 for a violent murder in Wolverhampton, in which he and another man killed a man during a robbery with knives and scissors. He had been released on license in 2006, but repeatedly failed to adhere to conditions, using heroin and accruing debts with local drug dealers. On 6 February, under the influence of heroin and crack cocaine, Johnson visited Mrs. Habesh, a church-going widow who had shown him kindness, and beat her to death with a heavy projector case as she made him a cup of tea. He stole £25 and some jewellery and struck her again to ensure she would not survive. The attack was deliberate, unprovoked, and fueled by drugs and the desire for money. He later involved his nephew to buy drugs with the stolen cash and admitted his crime to his brother, who contacted police. A pathologist determined Mrs. Habesh likely died late that night or the following morning. At Mould Crown Court, Mr. Justice Griffith Williams sentenced Johnson to life imprisonment, ordering that he should never be released, describing him as a dangerous criminal, as a very dangerous man, when under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Police and community members highlighted the betrayal of trust, noting that Mrs. Habesh had been a gentle, active and dignified member of the church community who had befriended Johnson. The case also prompted reviews of the probation and recall systems, examining why Johnson had not been recalled earlier despite his history of violent offending and drug abuse. The judge emphasized that Johnson alone was responsible for his actions, and that the attack on Mrs. Habesh was a particularly cowardly and vicious crime against a frail and vulnerable woman. In July 1982, Norma Richards, 27, and her 2 daughters, Samantha, 9, and Siretta, 7, were brutally murdered at their home in Dalston, East London. The killings went unsolved for 28 years, until Wilbert Dice, 54, of Forest Gate, was convicted at the Old Bailey following a cold case review prompted by a journalist investigating footballer Laurie Cunningham's family. Norma Richards had been the partner of Cunningham's brother, Keith, who was away in Spain at the time of the murders. On the day of the killings, Dice followed Norma Richards home, gaped her, and stabbed her repeatedly. Fearing that one of the children may have woken up, he killed Samantha by stabbing her 8 times and drowned Siretta. In an attempt to mislead investigators, Dice daubed National Front symbols on walls and doors. Norma Richards was found naked and stabbed, while her daughters were discovered in a bath of cold water. Her youngest daughter, 4-year-old Rodine Cunningham, was staying with her grandmother that weekend and discovered the bodies. Dice had been a minor acquaintance of the family and a known sexual predator, but he had not been suspected of the murders at the time. Advances in DNA technology during the cold case review ultimately led to his identification and arrest. At trial, Aftab Jafferji QC, prosecuting, described Dice's actions as deliberate and chilling, highlighting the premeditated nature of the attacks. Judge Anthony Morris sentenced Dice to 3 life terms with a whole life order, stating that the offences were of unspeakable brutality and utmost gravity and that he had shown no remorse. Detective Chief Inspector Stephen Lawrence described Dice as an evil, violent man who preys on the weak and vulnerable, and noted that he had never accepted responsibility for his crimes. Stephen Unwin and William McFall, 2 convicted murderers who first met behind bars, were handed whole life sentences after torturing and killing 28-year-old nail technician Kwain Nguyen in a crime described by the judge as monstrous. The pair lured Nguyen to Unwin's home in Shiny Row, near Sunderland, where they subjected her to hours of torment in a bid to force her bank details. Unwin then gaped her before the men forced her into her Audi, doused it in petrol, and set it alight while she was still alive. Firefighters later found her charred body in the back of the vehicle. The brutality of the murder was compounded by the men's criminal histories. Both had previously killed before, yet were freed on license years earlier. Unwin had murdered retired pharmacist John Greenwell on Christmas Day in 1998, killing him during a burglary and setting fire to his house to cover his tracks before being released in 2012. McFall, a violent burglar from Northern Ireland, had bludgeoned 86-year-old Martha Gilmore with a hammer in 1996 when she caught him in her home and was freed in 2010. The 2 killers met in HMP Swaleside, Kent, while serving their original life sentences. During sentencing at Newcastle Crown Court, Mr. Justice Morris called Unwin a calculating, manipulating and ruthless killer, and branded McFall an extremely violent man capable of monstrous behaviour. Nguyen's family were left devastated, with her sister describing the killers as evil and questioning how such dangerous men were ever released. Nguyen, who had come to the UK in 2010 to study business, had hoped to build a better life for her 2 children, but instead fell victim to the men's cruelty. Thomas Alexander Mayer, an unemployed gardener with long-standing ties to far-right extremist groups, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order for the murder of Labour MP Jo Cox in June 2016. Mayer ambushed Cox outside a library in Birstall, West Yorkshire, shooting her 3 times and stabbing her repeatedly while shouting nationalist slogans such as "Britain First" and "This is for Britain." The attack, which took place as Cox was on her way to meet constituents, was later described by the trial judge as a politically motivated act of terrorism intended to advance white supremacist and neo-Nazi ideology. Mayer had immersed himself in fascist and extremist literature for years, owning Nazi regalia, bomb-making manuals, and publications from both British and American far-right organizations, including the National Front and National Vanguard. Investigators also found he had researched white supremacist figures, mass shootings, and the Norwegian terrorist Anders Behring Breivik. Although Mayer had a history of mental health problems, psychiatric assessments concluded he was fully responsible for his actions at the time of the killing. During his trial at the Old Bailey, Mayer refused to enter a plea and offered no defense. Witnesses testified that he had declared his actions were to keep Britain independent. He was convicted in November 2016 after a jury deliberated for just 90 minutes. In sentencing him, the judge made clear that the murder was an act of violent extremism, noting Mayer's belief in white nationalism and his long-standing hatred of politicians he regarded as traitors. By imposing a whole life order, the court ensured Mayer will never be eligible for release. His conviction was officially classified as a terrorism offence, marking him as a domestic terrorist in the United Kingdom. Christopher Halliwell, a taxi driver from Swindon, was convicted of 2 brutal murders and is serving life imprisonment with a whole life order. His crimes first came to public attention in 2011, with the disappearance of 22-year-old Cian O'Callaghan, who was last seen leaving a nightclub in Swindon. Halliwell, 48 at the time, abducted her, and her body was later found in a shallow grave near Uffington, Oxfordshire. Police traced a green Toyota Avensis taxi linked to him and arrested Halliwell on the 24th of March 2011. He initially pleaded not guilty, but later admitted to O'Callaghan's murder at Bristol Crown Court in October 2012 and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. Following his arrest, Halliwell led police to the body of Becky Godden Edwards, a 20-year-old woman who had been missing since 2002 or 2003. Due to procedural errors by the police, Halliwell's confession could not initially be used in court, delaying justice. He was eventually tried and found guilty of her murder in September 2016, receiving a whole life sentence, meaning he will never be released. Halliwell's crimes involved abduction and the murder of young women, often with the bodies concealed. After his convictions, law enforcement investigated potential links to several other unsolved cases, including the disappearances of Sally Ann John Julie Finley, Trevelyan Evans, Claudia Lawrence, and Linda Rizal, though no further charges have been made. Investigations later revealed serious police mishandling of his confessions and missed opportunities that could have brought Halliwell to justice sooner. Halliwell is considered highly dangerous, and his whole life sentence ensures that he will remain in prison for life. Stephen Griffiths was convicted of the brutal murders of 3 women in Bradford, West Yorkshire, between 2009 and 2010. The victims, all sex workers, were Susan Rushworth, who disappeared on the 22nd of June 2009, Shelley Armitage, last seen on the 26th of April 2010, and Suzanne Blamires, reported missing on the 21st of May 2010. Parts of Blamires' body were recovered from the River Aire in Shipley, along with tissue later identified as Armitage's, but Rushworth's remains were never found. Griffiths was arrested on the 24th of May 2010, and during his arrest, he infamously gave his name as the Crossbow Cannibal. At the time of his arrest, Griffiths was a 40-year-old postgraduate criminology student at the University of Bradford, working on a PhD in homicide studies. He pleaded guilty to all 3 murders on the 21st of December 2010, and Leeds Crown Court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he will never be eligible for parole. While in prison, Griffiths has attempted to take his own life multiple times and undertook a 120-day hunger strike in 2011, during which he avoided contact with others. Griffiths had a long history of violent behavior. At 17, he received a 3-year sentence for an unprovoked knife attack on a supermarket manager. In 1991, psychiatrists diagnosed him as a schizoid psychopath, and in 1992, he received a 2-year sentence for holding a knife to the throat of a young girl. While in custody, he admitted he had fantasized about becoming a murderer. Police had monitored Griffiths for 2 years prior to the Bradford killings due to concerns over his interest in dismemberment, but at the time of the murders, no antisocial behavior order was in place. Thomas Hamilton McDowell, born in 1977 in Ballymena, County Antrim, Northern Ireland, was convicted of murdering 37-year-old German trainee, Rabbi Andreas Hintz, in 2002. Hintz, a gifted linguist, had arrived in Britain in 2000 to train as a rabbi at Leobach College. On the night of the 3rd of July 2002, Hintz spent the evening drinking alone at the Black Cap, a gay bar in Camden, North London. After meeting McDowell, he left the bar with him and went to McDowell's flat on Bain Street in the early hours. McDowell knocked Hintz to the floor with a martial arts kick, then strangled him. He dismembered the body using a ripsaw, wrapped the parts in bin liners, and left them on a nearby street for rubbish collection. The summer heat accelerated decomposition, producing a foul smell that ultimately led to the discovery of Hintz's remains. Hintz's mother, Barbara, and cousin Claudia Boberman travelled from Germany to appeal for information about his whereabouts. McDowell was arrested and appeared at the Old Bailey in December 2002. At his September 2004 trial, it was revealed that McDowell had suffered abuse as a child, held a strong hatred of homosexuals, and had a personality disorder. He admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Suffolk Crown Court sentenced him to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that he should never be released due to concerns about public safety. McDowell began his sentence at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire. On 22nd May 2013, Lee Rigby, a 25-year-old British Army soldier, was brutally murdered near the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, southeast London. Rigby, off duty at the time, was walking along Wellington Street when he was struck by a car driven by Michael Olumide Adebolajo and Michael Oluwatobi Adebowale. The two men then attacked him with knives and a cleaver, dragging his body into the road and announcing to bystanders that the killing was revenge for Muslims killed in British military operations abroad. Unarmed police arrived within 9 minutes of the emergency call, setting up a cordon. Armed officers arrived shortly after, and both attackers charged at them with weapons. The police fired, wounding both men, who were then taken to hospital and subsequently charged. Adebolajo and Adebowale, both British nationals of Nigerian descent, who had converted to Islam from Christianity, were already known to British security services. Adebolajo had a history of radical Islamist activity. He converted to Islam in 2003. He became involved with the banned extremist group Al-Muhajirun and had been arrested in connection with violent protests and suspected attempts to travel abroad for militant training. Authorities in Kenya detained him in 2010, fearing he might join Al-Shabaab, but he was released to UK authorities without charges. Following the attack, Adebolajo was hospitalized, then charged with the murder of Rigby, attempted murder of police officers, and possession of a firearm. During his court proceedings, he asked to be known as Mujahid Abu Hamza. On the 19th of December 2013, he was convicted of Rigby's murder. On 26 February 2014, Adebolajo received a whole life sentence, meaning he will never be released, while Adebowale received a minimum term of 45 years. During sentencing, Adebolajo shouted, "Allahu Akbar," in the courtroom, displaying the extremist beliefs that had motivated the attack. Gary Smith and Lee Newell are British prisoners who were sentenced to whole life imprisonment for the brutal murder of a fellow inmate, Subhan Anwar, at Long Lartin High Security Prison in Worcestershire. Both men were already serving life sentences for previous killings. On 14th February, Smith and Newell followed 24-year-old Anwar into his cell. Using weapons improvised from a pen and a toothbrush, they bound his ankles with tape and strangled him with his own tracksuit bottoms. After the killing, Smith calmly made Newell a cup of hot chocolate before the men allowed prison guards into the cell. Anwar was found dead, and the attackers showed minimal emotion throughout the incident. The motive for the murder remains unclear, though the court noted a moral code in prisons, where inmates sometimes target those convicted of crimes against children. Anwar was serving a life sentence for the murder of his partner's 2-year-old child, Sanam Nafsaka. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict both Smith and Newell. Mr. Justice Jeremy Baker ruled that this was one of the exceptional cases warranting whole life sentences, stating, "There is in reality no mitigating factor in either of your cases. Neither man will ever be eligible for parole. Both refused to attend the full sentencing hearing." Lee Newell, serving a life sentence since the late 1980s for the murder of 56-year-old Mary Neal in Norwich. He strangled her and hid her body in a cupboard. Gary Smith, serving a life sentence since 1999 for murdering 22-year-old Ali Hassan, whose naked body he threw into a quarry. Smith believed Hassan was a police informer. In 2003, London was shaken by the kidnapping and murder of 5 members of the Chauhan family. Amarjit Chauhan, a successful freight businessman, vanished along with his wife Nancy, their 2 young sons, and Nancy's mother Charanjit Kaur. The bodies were initially buried in a field near Tiverton, Devon, before being dumped at sea off Dorset. While 3 of the adult victims were eventually recovered, the 2 children, aged 8 weeks and 18 months, were never found. The killings were linked to a financial motive. The perpetrators intended to take control of Chauhan's shipping company, allegedly to use it for drug trafficking. Kenneth Reagan and William Hornsey were identified as the ringleaders behind the murders and received whole life sentences. Reagan, a convicted drug dealer and former police informant, had worked briefly for Chauhan and exploited his connections to lure the family into a trap. Hornsey, formerly an accountant, had a history of providing false identities for criminals. Both men were deeply involved in the logistics of the murders, from binding and drugging the family to burying the bodies and later dumping them at sea. A key piece of evidence was a note found hidden in Amarjit Chauhan's sock, which pointed directly to Regan as one of the perpetrators. The investigation was one of the most complex in Metropolitan Police history. After a massive manhunt across Europe, Regan was arrested in Belgium, and Hornsey, using the alias William Smith, was located in the Ardennes before being extradited to the UK. The 8-month trial at the Old Bailey was the longest in Metropolitan Police history, costing around £10 million. Both men were convicted on the 1st of July 2005. Peter Rees, a third accomplice, was sentenced to 23 years for his part in Amarjit Chauhan's murder and assisting the offenders, but was cleared of the other murders. The judge described the crimes as uniquely terrible, emphasizing the cold-blooded nature of murdering a baby and toddler alongside the adults